All right. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is David Patrick Harry with Church of the Eternal Logos. And tonight, we have a very interesting stream. We're going to be diving into a conversation regarding Mr. Jeffrey Epstein's secret black book. And this stream is part and parcel to a two-parter that was just released over on the Sahwn Ryan podcast. And so, as you would already suspect, given the topic at hand, I saw before we went live that YouTube has already said that this is not suitable for most advertisers. So I'm not even sure. Are you able to send in super chats on YouTube? I'm not even sure if they're allowing the stream to be monetized or not. But if you'd like to support, feel free to use the Streamlabs or the Dono chat link in the video description. We're going to be covering this two-part interview that Sahwn Ryan did over on his podcast with Nick Bryant, and he is the author of the Franklin Scandal, of which I'm going to introduce to you exactly what that is if you've never heard of it. And he's been an activist in regards to justice concerning the crimes surrounding Jeffrey Epstein. Now, I don't have a big monologue today to get into the topic because both sections are over an hour long in regards to the conversation. So I really want to get into the interview and kind of stop, review, discuss various things that may come up. But I do want to highlight somebody who's been fantastic in regards to research concerning these things, and that'd be a woman named Whitney Webb. And so if you guys haven't, oh, thank you very much. First person queue. It looks like they are allowing super chats. So I don't think I'm going to be able to run ads on this stream, but shout out to first person queue for sending in $2. Says testing 1 2 3. It is working. This video's monetization didn't kill itself. Thanks, Stephen Young. But thank you very much, first person queue, for that. Really appreciate it. So what I was saying, though, in regards to this topic, I would say one of the best people I've seen covering this is a woman named Whitney Webb. And she has a book that she's published on this topic. It's called One Nation Under Blackmail. Let me pull that up for you guys so you can see that. It looks like this. One Nation Under Blackmail, Volume 1. It's a two-volume book, very dense, but her research is fantastic. Now, we're not going to be listening. I do have, again, in regards to one of the better interviews that I really like with Whitney Webb, there is this one from 6 months ago on the PBD podcast. I remember she did a really good one with Glenn Beck one time. But anything that you can find of hers, especially if it's long form, I would highly recommend, because she is really phenomenal on many of the entanglements tied to this. But the conversation we're going to be focusing on is really just going to be pertaining to Epstein and this journalist Nick Bryant and his research. And he's one of the few people who has had access to the secret black book. He says in the interview, one of the things he's good at is getting hold of things. So I want to get into that again. And so feel free if anybody has comments, anything they want to say before or while we're going through, I'll bring in all super chats so that, again, you guys are part of the stream, no doubt. So if you guys have a comment about something specific that comes up, we will absolutely address that. I want to give a special thank you to DC Woodworking, donated $3, says, you are covering the dangerous topics. Keep up the great work, brother. Well, thank you so much. Yeah, I know the last one we had to avoid using different terminology. Luckily, it seems like everything went well there. And this one obviously is so. And I saw everything was good until as soon as I hit live, I saw the monetization status for the video got changed. But I'm sure that's part and parcel of anything you post regarding Epstein and Epstein Island, anything that he was related to. So again, that's the world we live in. But I figured at least some of the things that I worry about, that this would be a topic. I mean, it's so out in the open that it's not like I'm the first one covering it. As again, even Nick Bryant says, is that as this becomes more and more and more discussed in the public sphere, that only brings more and more light to this issue, which has been covered up for so many decades, and that the U.S. government has been aiding and abetting not only Epstein, but you can imagine many others like him. So, anyways, let's just again, let me just make sure we are covered on everything. Yes. So without further ado, let's get into today's stream in regards to the topic at hand. I will say, if anybody does want to support the stream, one of the best things you can do is become a website member. And you can become a website member right here on my website. Let me check this real quick. Again, this is just some standard stuff. If you guys would like to help a brother out, you can become a website member with this link right here. I would greatly appreciate that. I got a one-on-one with a gentleman over in Norway tomorrow. Shout out to Martin. If anybody else would like to set up a one-on-one session, I typically set those up on Wednesday. You can sign up here with that. And if anybody would like to sponsor a stream, we got a sponsored stream I'll be doing tomorrow night on narcissistic personality disorder, looking at romantic relationships with narcissists, their tendency for deceit, and of course, their grandiosity in regards to how they perceive themselves and their relationships with other people. So tomorrow's going to be an interesting stream. We'll be doing discussing a lot in regards to narcissism, the mythology of Narcissus, where the term narcissism comes from. So that is a sponsor stream. Shout out to Jeffrey Ivy for sponsoring that stream. We will be doing that tomorrow night. And if anybody else would like to sponsor a stream, feel free to use that link right there. Also, if anybody wants to support, get some merchandise. We got merchandise over on YouTube, the YouTube store, but also on my website. I'd be greatly appreciative of anybody who's interested in that. So thank you guys very, very much. So super chat came in from Wire. He says, is synchronicity orthodox? Yes. We just call it providence, though. The difference between synchronicity, some sort of interior happening, and its exterior presentation, if you will, as you know, the Jungian synchronicity concept. We definitely believe in synchronicity. The difference is we posit that God is in total control. And so when you experience a synchronistic event, what you're experiencing is, in a way, a providential occurrence. Now, at the same time, like I said, we don't believe in angel numbers and all this different stuff. This gets people into, again, like Jim Carrey in the movie 23. You start trying to decipher everything, and this is not a sort of the orthodox phronema, if you will, but certainly providence is an essential dimension of orthodox spirituality. So thank you so much, Wire, for that. Okay, so let's get into today's stream, because we're going to be here a minute in regards to going through this interview. So let me bring that up right now. So here is Nick Bryant. And he, again, so Sahwn Ryan premiered these. So this is a 2-part interview, and the second part was just out today. It just came out today at 1:00, and the first part came out yesterday. So these are brand new interviews with this gentleman, and you can see the title is Epstein's Secret Black Book. So Let's just go ahead and begin to go through this interview. Now, I'm going to be stopping and pausing. Again, if anybody has super chats or anything they want to make comments on, I'll be make sure to bring that up on the screen as well. So without further ado, let's get into it. All right.
Appreciate it. It's an honor to have you here.
It's an honor to be on your show.
So I guess I should say I have been fascinated with the Jeffrey Epstein topic ever since it kind of came to light. And I've been looking for somebody that really knows the ins and outs and all the little details of what was going on in there. It took a little bit for us to find somebody, but you are the perfect fit. And I cannot wait to dive in and see what kind of information you've uncovered.
Unfortunately, it's the government that's with Epstein. We have the government aiding and abetting child trafficking, which is ultimately very sordid, but it's something, and it goes against our grain, the values of Americans. It's anathema to our values, but it's something that we have to straighten out as a society to make sure that this doesn't happen again.
Yeah, the U.S. government seems to be at the center of a lot of issues today.
Yes.
But I want to give you a quick intro here. So Nick Bryant, you're an advocate and published writer focused on topics such as the plight of disadvantaged children in the U.S. You spent 7 years investigating coast-to-coast child trafficking networks, author of The Franklin Scandal, which we'll get into a little bit.
And so for those of you who aren't aware of the Franklin scandal, I brought this up, and of course, Wikipedia is a terrible source, but you're going to hear him. He has one of the sort of authoritative books on the topic. But if you go to Wikipedia, of course, it's just a hoax. So the child prostitution ring allegations began in June 1988 in Omaha, Nebraska, and attracted significant public and political interest until late 1990, when separate state and federal grand juries concluded that the allegations were unfounded and the ring was a carefully crafted hoax. Now, he's going to bring this up because it absolutely was not a hoax, but again, it shows you the aiding and abetting of people in powerful positions around the U.S. federal government. In 1988, authorities looked into allegedly baseless, allegations that prominent citizens of Nebraska, as well as high-level U.S. politicians, were involved in a child trafficking ring. We'll just say that, prostitution ring. Alleged abuse victims were interviewed who claimed that children in foster care were flown to the East Coast of the United States to be abused at bad parties. The claims primarily centered on Lawrence E. King Jr., who ran the now defunct Franklin Community Federal Credit Union in Omaha, Nebraska, and alleged that the ring was a cult of devil worshippers involved in the mutilation, sacrifice, and cannibalism of numerous children. Numerous conspiracy theories evolved, claiming that the alleged abuse was part of a widespread series of crimes, including devil worship, cannibalism, drug trafficking, and the CIA arms dealing. In July 1990, a private investigator, Gary Caradori, hired by the state of Nebraska to investigate the allegations, died along with his 8-year-old son when his plane disintegrated in midair. Foul play was suspected by Caradori's brother and state senator Lauren Schmidt, who was not proven by investigators. The Nebraska State Foster Care Review Board submitted the results of a 2-year investigation into the alleged physical and sexual abuse of foster children in the executive board of the Nebraska legislature, who were investigating reports of child sex abuse linked to the credit union. After investigation, a grand jury in Douglas County, where Omaha, Nebraska is situated, determined the abuse allegations were baseless, describing them as a carefully crafted hoax and indicting 2 of the original accusers on perjury charges. The grand jury suspected that the false stories originated from a fired Boys Town employee who might have fueled the fire of rumor and innuendo because of personal grudges. A federal grand jury also concluded that the abuse allegations were unfounded and indicted 20-year-old Alicia Owen, an alleged victim, on 8 counts of perjury. Owen served 4.5 years in prison. Separately, the federal grand jury indicted multiple officers of the credit union for embezzlement funds, including King. So the official narrative, I only bring this up because the official narrative that we are told is that this was a hoax. But again, we'll be hearing a little bit more about that. So if you weren't aware, now you are aware. So let's continue on.
An investigator of the Epstein network and published Epstein's Little Black Book that we all hear all about. And so before we kind of really get going, I'm just curious, what got you started in the trafficking genre, bringing awareness to that?
What happened? I've written a lot about children's issues. That's a topic that's near and dear to my heart, is children's issues, mostly lower socioeconomic children and the travails. And I ultimately co-authored a book called America's Children Triumph for Tragedy, that looked at a lot of the shortcomings that our country pays great lip service to children as its most precious resource. But as I showed in America's Children Triumph for Tragedy, the resources aren't allocated for children the way that they should be. And so that's an issue that's very, very close to my heart. And I was a writer and journalist in Minnesota for a number of years. And then I ultimately moved to New York City, and I started writing for magazines there. And I was pitching an editor at Rolling Stone. And I said, well, what do you want me to write an article about? And he goes, pitch me dark stories. And I had no idea I said, I kind of threw my arms up in there. I said, Nazis, Satanists, how dark do you want to get?
Yeah.
And I'd written some dark stories before. That's maybe why he thought I'd specialized in darkness. So you can kind of tell editors, their eyes, there's a little sparkle when you hit something and when I said Satanism, and he goes, Satanists. And I could see that little glint in his eye. So I wasn't really well versed in the subject, but I started looking into the occult fraternities and the darker occult fraternities. And then I talked to various Satanists of various stripes, and I found them to be kind of an unsavory group. But my job was to write an article. And I kind of had a simple plan. I was going to cultivate a relationship with some of these people, and then ultimately attend a dark mass, write a book about it, or a black mass, and then write an article about it. And then I came across this U.S. Customs report. When you're a writer, and a lot of writers will talk about this, when you're a writer, although you're looking at a certain subject, you're always surfing the net for stuff that's tangential to it, or that's related to it. And I came across this U.S. Customs report about a cult called the Finders. They had a couple of warehouses in Washington, D.C., and 2 finders had been busted in Tallahassee, Florida, with 6 children. And the 6 children were like ragamuffins, and some concerned citizens called the Tallahassee Police Department. And then the Tallahassee Police Department went to that park and saw the kids and saw the 2 finders, and they arrested the finders and put the kids in child protective services. And what happened there was, and then these 2 finders were charged with multiple counts of child abuse. And the U.S. Customs got involved because there was child pornography. And the D.C. police, the finders had warehouses in D.C., and the D.C. police had been interested in the finders for quite some time.
Are the finders the folks involved in the Franklin scandal?
No, it was kind of my segue into the Franklin scandal. So with the finders, the DC police and the U.S. Customs executed a search warrant on the warehouses of the finders. And they found really very incriminating stuff. And the kids were being held in Tallahassee. And actually, a doctor had said that 2 of the kids had been sexually abused. So what happened was I've got the U.S. Customs report, and the U.S. Customs report is so mind-boggling that I put the entire U.S. Customs report in the back of the Franklin scandal. So what happens is that investigation is going full throttle. You've got the Tallahassee Police Department involved. You've got U.S. Customs involved. You've got D.C. Police involved, and then you had the FBI involved. And then all of a sudden, and it said this on the report, that the investigation of the finders had become a quote unquote CIA internal matter, and there'll be no more investigation. So I read that document and I was just stunned. I was thinking, this does not match the world that I live in. And that opened my mind up to looking for other scenarios that might be like that, where there might be trafficking children and then intelligence was involved. And then that led me to the Franklin scandal. It was on the internet. There was a lot of talk about a lot of postings about this pedophile network in Omaha, Nebraska. And this former state senator, his name is John DeCamp, he had written a book about it. And I read the book. I didn't think was really well done. I mean, it wasn't like a regular journalist, but actually Yorkshire Television in the UK had made a documentary about it. And that documentary had been quashed. So, and you could get the documentary on the internet. So I got the documentary, and I had a bunch of my friends come to my apartment, and I gave showings of it. And I was thinking, am I losing my mind, or is does this look ominous to you? And they all said, this is very ominous. So I went to Omaha. I knew that something had happened in Omaha, Nebraska, but I wasn't sure exactly what had happened. I thought that there had been some kids molested in Omaha, but the internet was talking about kids being flown from coast to coast, intelligence involved, Boys Town students, which Boys Town is probably the most famous orphanage in the world, talked about all these things. And I was,
Yeah, so for those of you who have never heard, Boys Town right here is a non-for-profit orphanage there in Nebraska. It's a Catholic orphanage, and unfortunately, there has been multiple cases of some Catholic priests who were sent to Boys Town, and of course, they then were tied with some of the pedo activities that were going on, but they were using, and this is when he fits in. When he's talking about Boys Town, he's talking about this massive Catholic orphanage there in Nebraska. And it's not like it's a dangerous place, as he'll highlight, and you can find interviews, like the boys, the orphans that were there really enjoyed being in Boys Town. They got a great education. It was very safe. They were well fed. However, unfortunately, those that were part of these predatory circles, including some of these priests, they would go there. They would, again, then lure some of these boys into various pedo activities. So when he's talking about Boys Town, this is what he's talking about right here. You guys can look that up.
I was skeptical. I mean, I really tried to keep my mind open, but I was skeptical. But when I got there, I started to talk to people.
Well, we'll get into that in just a second.
Sure.
I want to ask, why is, I mean, it's a fairly obvious question, I guess. It should be near and dear to everybody's heart, but what is it specifically that drew you to bringing exposure to child trafficking and sex exploitation and all of that?
Well, because with the Franklin scandal and also with the Epstein scandal, you've got child trafficking that's being covered up. And as I came across the Franklin scandal 21 years ago, and as I've dug deeper and deeper into this, I've been embraced by anti-trafficking organizations, and I've spoken at anti-trafficking conferences, and I've met a lot of people that have been trafficked, and no one has paid for it.
Yeah.
And that's just something, there has to be justice. The government cannot be covering up child trafficking on any level, local, state, federal. No one should be covering up child trafficking.
You had mentioned something earlier, I can't remember your exact words, but you were saying that basically, I think in essence, you were saying that the government doesn't take this seriously, and the allotted funding and the focus on trafficking it's almost not even there. I mean, I went to a fundraiser for one of those organizations recently, and there was a gentleman that spoke. He was the head of Homeland Security's division in this, and he said there are only 8,000 agents, only 8,000 agents out there that are combating sex trafficking and sex exploitation for children. Meanwhile, it's a $150 billion a year business that we know about. There are 366 million videos out there of children being sexually exploited.
That we know about.
And there's only 8,000. And I'm not talking about 8,000 in the United States, 8,000 in the entire world.
Is that not nuts? That, again, according to Sahwn Ryan and sources he knows, they're talking about only 8,000 agents in the world pursuing this stuff. And I'll just say, when I did a review on the movie Sound of Freedom, which is tied to this, of course, that was removed by YouTube, and they gave me a community guideline strike violation for cyberbullying or harassment. And it's like, of who exactly? But, Tim Ballard, the guy who, he's Mormon, but the guy who that movie is based on, or that Jim Caviezel plays, I don't know if you guys saw, but he's recently being sued now. And so if the federal government, just like, again, cleaning up the homeless problem in San Francisco, if they actually really wanted to deal with this stuff, they could. But of course, our federal government is aiding and abetting in the entire process.
Are working on this stuff. 8,000 in the entire world. That shows you right there that this is not a priority for any government, any agency. I mean, it's ridiculous, which makes me think they're all in on it.
Well, there's a lot of child trafficking that has been covered up. I mean, we know of child trafficking that's been covered up in the United States. We know of child trafficking, I'm talking huge networks that have been covered up in the UK, that have been covered up in Belgium, that have been covered up in Spain, that have been covered up in Argentina. That have been covered up in Mexico. There's a lot of child trafficking networks that have been covered up. And we see this, Epstein is right in our face. Mm-hmm. I mean, we know that Epstein was trafficking all kinds of girls to numerous perpetrators. And only one person has been indicted for those crimes, and that's Ghislaine Maxwell. Well, we know that there's scores of people that were involved in those crimes. So our government has to have the will to go after traffickers and child pornography. And our government just doesn't show the will now, but it's going to be up to the American people, ultimately. The American people have to put their foot down and say, no more.
Okay, this is an ad of Sahwn Ryan's brand. Let's skip through that real quick. Okay, buy gold. Okay, here we go.
This is an instance where the American people really have to get vociferous and correct their government and not allow their government to cover up Epstein, because there's been other networks that have been covered up. And this is something that the government should not be involved in, is covering up child trafficking, which is essentially aiding and abetting child trafficking. So we're at a point now where we have to put our foot down and say, that's it, no more. We need those Epstein perpetrators indicted. We need those Epstein procurers indicted. And we're not going to settle for anything less. That's what we need.
Let's talk a little bit about the Franklin scandal before we get into Epstein, because that was your first big book. Franklin scandal book. It's about an alleged child prostitution ring out of Omaha, Nebraska, that took place around 1988, managed by Lawrence King, if I'm correct.
There were two primary pimps, Lawrence King of Omaha, Nebraska, and Craig Spence of Washington, D.C.
The victims ain't.
Now, again, reminder as they start talking about the Franklin scandal, as I showed you, according to the official narrative, this was a concocted hoax. So just keep that in mind, right?
Age from the victims' ages range from 8 years old to 14 years old, and let's just start there.
Well, with the Franklin scandal, I went to Omaha. I knew that something had gone down with the Franklin scandal, but there was all kinds of internet speculation, and I didn't know how much of that was apocrypha and how much of it wasn't. So when I went to Omaha the first time, and I went there a number of times, but when I went to Omaha the first time, I knew that something had gone down, but I thought it was a local pedophile ring, not like a nationwide network. I didn't think it was involved in blackmail. I thought that local law enforcement had probably covered it up and not federal law enforcement. So when I got to Omaha the first time, I realized that it was much bigger and uglier than I ever could have imagined. And I took some heat. I had like a death threat, and I was followed.
From who?
A woman. It was funny. I was staying with a friend of mine. I told my friend, I'm going to look into this thing. And I'd known him for many years, since I was a teenager. And I said, I'm going to look into this thing. We hadn't hung out in a while. So I'm going to look into this thing and, see what's happening. And then, and then we'll hang out and go do some stuff. And so I told him, I went, the first night I was there, we were having dinner. I told him what I was looking into, and he looked at me like, are you sure? And I said, well, yeah, I'm gonna check this out. So I was staying at his place when a woman came to the door and said, and he was there. So, and she said, you're in a great deal of danger and they're going to kill you. And she was a freaky looking woman. And now my buddy had started, I'd been there for about a week, and my buddy had started to come around with some of the stuff that I was reporting back to him. But then that woman coming to his door and dispensing that, well, it made both of us, we didn't sleep very easily that night. But here's the thing. By that time, I'd come to the conclusion this was a huge network. It had been in operation for at least a decade, and multiple children were destroyed. And I don't have a family. I'm not married. I don't have children. I can take risks that other people wouldn't be comfortable with taking risks. And I just said, this is too evil. And it was covered up by both federal and state law enforcement and authorities. And I just said, what was done here was just too evil. I'm not going to quit. If I get killed, I get killed. I mean, but I'm not going to quit doing this. I'm going to expose this to the best of my ability. And that started my odyssey.
Did this go on? Did the harassment from whoever it was continue?
There was harassment. I think a lot of harassment was thrown at me the first time I was there. And they thought, well, he's probably a journalist from New York and, we'll never see him again. But there was harassment subsequently, but nothing like it was initially. I mean, that was the only time I had like an overt death threat was the first time I was there. But I was so committed to doing it at that point that whatever difficulties I was going to have, I was willing to endure them to get this story out. Because, as I said, this network that I wrote about in the Franklin scandal, it had been in operation for about 10 years, and it had destroyed scores of children. And it had been covered up by federal and state law enforcement. And I just said, this cannot stand. I mean, something has to be done about this. And I'm going to write a book about it, and hopefully I can get it published. And I was represented by a relatively big literary agent at that point. And I gave them the book proposal. And then within 2 weeks, I was no longer a client of theirs. And then I knew James Fitzgerald. He was an agent. He's since passed away. And he ran a good agency. I mean, he had published a number of popular books, or facilitated the publishing of a number of popular books, and he couldn't sell it. I mean, I'd met with some publishers, and they were just concerned about libel. And finally, there was a small publisher outside of Eugene, Oregon, that was willing to. And by that time, there were, and I don't know if your listeners and viewers are familiar with the machinations of a grand jury, but with a grand juries are notorious for covering stuff up, because a special prosecutor is picked to prosecute a grand jury. And grand jurors are just citizens that have shown up for jury duty that have been funneled to a grand jury. So, and the special prosecutor calls the witnesses and also picks the evidence that's shown to the grand jurors. And it's not at.
And so these grand juries are the reason why, again, the Franklin scandal is considered a hoax, because as we saw down here, the 2 grand juries is what he's referring to. The federal grand jury that he's describing, Nick Bryant, they actually then put in jail one of the supposed girls that were actually abused. And she, like it says, was in jail for 4.5 years. So these are the grand juries he's talking about, which have now established the official narrative of this thing being disproven as a hoax. Just FYI. That way you understand what he's referring to.
Not adversarial. It's just one-sided. And then everything is sealed, and it's against the law to talk about it. So there was a New York judge that said, Supreme Court judge that said, special prosecutors have so much power over grand jurors that they could get them to indict a ham sandwich. And so with this case, the Franklin case, I managed to get the sealed grand jury and testimony of one of the grand juries, and I bring the reader right into that grand jury, and I show how corrupt it is. And because that grand jury declared that all these kids getting abused was a carefully crafted hoax, but it didn't even name who the hoaxers were. It kind of pinned like the hoax on a bunch of drug-addled kids, which was, I mean, and then a federal grand jury said the same thing. That was equally corrupt. And there again, you just need one guy, one special prosecutor who's corrupt, and then he can get the grand jurors to do whatever they want them to do. So these 2 grand juries had said that there was no child abuse. But after I got the sealed testimony and exhibits of one of those grand juries, I mean, at that point, I was really able to write the book, because the exhibits gave me a lot of information. And then I was able to show just exactly how one of the grand juries had been co-opted.
Wow. Let's talk about a little bit about what was going on there. So there was alleged abuse.
A major thank you to Bill Hicks. He's back from the dead. Bill Hicks just became a COTEL crew member over on Church of the Eternal Logos. Shout out to you, Bill Hicks. Thank you so much, brother, for becoming a COTEL crew member. Enjoy the emojis. And that, just want to remind everybody, if you also want to become a COTEL crew member here on the YouTube channel, you get access to exclusive YouTube emojis. And if you want to show some love, feel free to support either using YouTube or, more importantly, Streamlabs or Dono Chat. The links are in the video description.
Use was widespread series of crimes, including devil worship, cannibalism, drug trafficking, and CIA's arm deals. Okay,
so that comes from the Wikipedia page.
Okay.
And the Wikipedia page is farcical. If you go on my website, I go to I've got a link to the Wikipedia talk page, because you've got like the Wikipedia page and then you've got like the talk section. And that Wikipedia page has been taken over by people that want to make this nonsensical.
Okay.
And there's pages and pages and pages of debate. And actually, I called Jimmy Wales, who started Wikipedia. I'm a pretty good investigator. I was able to get his private cell phone number. And I called him up and I said, you're my last hope for making this Wikipedia page read realistically. And he was completely unwilling to help me. I'm going to release that conversation on my website in the relatively near future.
What did he?
That is this Wikipedia page right here that I was showing you guys. That's why I began the stream by reading that to you.
You said, why wouldn't he?
He said that, well, I'm going to look into it. Send me some emails. And so I sent him some emails, and then he said that he didn't get them. I texted him.
I don't understand why there are so many people in powerful positions that protect pedophiles. Why would you not want to protect the children? Why does everybody in a powerful, I guess I shouldn't say everybody, but it seems to me the more I dive into this subject, the more I see the more elite status you have, the more compliant you are with pedophiles and sex trafficking and sex exploitation. What is it?
Well, I think people reach a certain plateau, socioeconomic plateau, and they're afraid of losing what they have, and they're afraid of not getting what they want. I mean, I think it's that simple. And when I saw like some of the
So you're just saying that it's greed, money.
It's fear.
If you're not into pedophilia,
it's fear.
The fear that you place more important, you have more value on money than you do on little kids.
Absolutely. And your status and your house payments and your car payments and your kids' college. There were some people that covered this up that were definitely compromised pedophiles. And that's one thing about our political system is that Americans, and that's why there's so much blowback on that Wikipedia page, is the people that are in control of the Wikipedia page on the Franklin scandal. They want to make sure that it doesn't come out that the government has covered up that pedophile network. And they want to make sure that blackmail, because blackmail plays an integral role. And I've been at this for 21 years, and Epstein had cameras in all of his homes. I mean, Epstein was definitely a blackmail artist. And the government wants to make sure that does not come out. That a huge part of our political system is predicated on blackmail. And especially if that dark, malignant corner of the intelligence that is using blackmail against our politicians and other people, if they were using children, I mean, that would make the American people erupt. So that's why that Wikipedia page is locked down. And that's why this is important. This is, for that dark corner of intelligence, this is Omaha Beach. They're not going to give an inch, because this is the last thing that they want out. And it's amazing how the Epstein scandal has been covered up. If you look at all the victims and all the perpetrators and all the procurers involved in the Epstein network, I mean, we're talking score, and the people that facilitated it, like the pilots and like Epstein's house managers and the cooks and everybody else. We're talking scores and scores of people. And no one's been indicted except for Ghislaine Maxwell. And that really shows that our government, unfortunately, wants to stop it there. Our government does not, I mean, although Americans do, I think, are coming around to the belief that Epstein is taking part in blackmail, or a lot of them, it doesn't make sense. Why is our government aiding and abetting child trafficking? And unless they're protecting some very powerful people and a political process, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the only way that it makes sense.
Yeah.
And I saw that with the Franklin scandal too. And actually, I think the Franklin network might have been bigger than Epstein's network.
How many kids were involved in the Franklin scandal?
It's difficult to know, but it was operational for about 10 years. And it was getting kids from like Boys Town. And
what's Boys Town?
It's a Catholic orphanage. It's probably the most famous orphanage in the world. And it was getting kids that fell between the cracks. I mean, people like Epstein and then like the
the Catholic Church has a long history of being involved in this stuff.
Yeah.
So that's, I mean, unfortunately, I hate to say it, I was raised Catholic, but it's I guess it doesn't come to me as a surprise. Although it probably wouldn't come to me as a surprise if it was any other. You just have seen, I've seen so many, this minister, this guy, this priest, this, it's all, they've all partaken, unfortunately.
The number 2 guy at Boys Town, Father James Kelly, he molested a bunch of kids in upstate New York. And then the Catholic Church, in its infinite wisdom, moved him to Boys Town, where he molested a bunch of other kids. And then eventually they moved him to a prison in Las Vegas. So, because I have come across a lot of kids that were molested by Father Kelly, or James Kelly, at Boys Town. And I think that he was part of that network. Because if the priests gave the kids privileges, no one would argue with that. So I think that Kelly was a compromised pedophile, and that he gave King et al. Access to the Boys Town kids. And then I've got a paper trail between Boys Town and Lawrence E. King, one of the primary pimps of the Franklin scandal network. So there's a lot of connections there. But I think Father Kelly was, and then there was another priest there that was sent to Argentina. At a certain point,
Sent to Argentina.
Yeah. So, but Father James Kelly was, he was a major predator, and he preyed on God knows how many boys in upstate New York, and preyed on God knows how many. And with Boys Town, these are lower socioeconomic kids from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, dysfunctional families. And at Boys Town, they're being taken care of. They're being fed well. They're getting a good education. A lot of them want to stay there because it's the safest place they've ever been. And a predator like Father James Kelly knows that. And it gives him carte blanche to prey on kids. And actually, Boys Town has gone to bat for him because there's been people that have tried to litigate against Kelly. And the only reason why Boys Town hasn't paid out substantial settlements is because of the statute of limitations. They've hid behind the statute of limitations. And they're making millions of dollars in donations, Boys Town.
How did this network work? Who all was involved?
So there were two primary pimps, Lawrence E. King and Craig Spence. King and Spence were in Southeast Asia during Vietnam. King was in Thailand with a top security clearance. I don't know exactly what he was doing, but he had a top security clearance. And Spence was an ABC reporter in Vietnam. So I'm surmising that both of them, and they both came from working class, blue collar families. And I'm surmising that both of them got busted molesting kids in Southeast Asia. And that's where they returned. Because as soon as they came back to the United States, their careers just became, it was like a skyrocket. Lawrence E. King became the manager.
And if you read some of Whitney Webb's stuff, again, on her book, One Nation Under Blackmail, this idea that people that are complicit in some of these rings, or whether they did something in different parts of the world, they always get elevated. It's like this failing up system of degeneracy, of which we are run by these degenerate, usually globalist entities. Very ironic, right? How they tend to get promoted and given more and more power. The same thing's true when you look into, again, Iran-Contra, the China Gate during the Clinton administration, that type of stuff. So just want to throw that in there.
Of the Franklin Credit Union, and went from like $17,000 a year to making millions. I mean, a lot of that was ill-begotten. And Craig Spence went from ABC correspondent in Vietnam to a major power broker in Washington, D.C. as soon as he got back. And Craig Spence would have these huge parties at his place. He's very much like the Epstein character in the Franklin scandal. His house was wired for audiovisual blackmail. And what would happen at those parties is it would be like a bunch of power brokers would be invited. It was a who's who of Washington, D.C. in the 1980s would go to Craig Spence's place. And there would be, a lot of times, if there wasn't just like outright pedophilic orgies, it would be like a cocktail party, a Washington, D.C. cocktail party. And people would be plied with alcohol. And then maybe at 10 or 11, something sexually inappropriate would happen. Or someone would fire up a joint or break out a line of coke or whatever. And the people that were, didn't want any part of that would leave, but the people that wanted to be part of that would stay. And then his entire house was wired for audiovisual blackmail. So if you stayed, you got blackmailed. That was it. And I wrote a second book I wrote a book called Confessions of a DC Madam, The Politics of Sex, Lies, and Blackmail with Henry Vincent. And Henry Vincent used to give, Craig Spence used to get gay escorts from Henry Vincent. He ran a gay escort service. And we're talking in the mid-1980s, Craig Spence was spending $25,000 a month on gay escorts for him and his buddies. And King and Spence ran this pedophile network together. And they would get Vincent and Henry was, and actually there is some comedic elements to this. Henry was a mortician. He had grown up in Southwest West Virginia in a very religious home, and he was gay, and he had to repress that. And he ultimately became a funeral director, mortician, and moved to Washington, D.C. for his mortuary fortunes. And then through just a weird set of circumstances, there was a couple of gay morticians that would hang out at this bar, which was kind of like the gay equivalent to Chippendales. And Henry met one of the dancers, and they went out for dinner. And the dancer told Henry that an escort service was up for sale because the guy was dying of AIDS. And Henry said, "Well, how much can you make?" And the guy said, "Well, I can make like 1,000 a night if everything is right." And then Henry said, "Well, how much is the is he selling it for? And it was like $13,000. So Henry went from, and Henry's a very shy, guarded guy who had lived in the closet for all these years. And he just, it was completely out of character for him to do this, but he did it. And was a very brilliant marketer. What he did was, after he bought it, he called all the numbers in the DC Yellow Pages under escorts, male escorts. And most escort agencies are fly by night, and they don't pay their phone bill. So Henry would dial one of the numbers, and if the number was disconnected, he would call the phone company and say, I will pay the arrears on that phone number. So he ended up with half the numbers in the Yellow Pages of escort services. He's very brilliant that way with marketing. But anyway, and everything was going really well for him. He was working as a funeral director, and he was making a lot of money at this gay escort service. And then he got a call from Craig Spence, that CI asset. And then King and Spence would have Henry come to Spence's home, and they would pressure Henry to get him children, and he wouldn't do it. He said, I'm not gonna, I want no part of that. And this is kind of interesting. And there's a lot of corroboration about blackmail in the Franklin scandal, not just this, but so King and Spence were there, and Henry was there, and Henry didn't like King at all. And Spence was, they're both sociopaths, but Spence started to ask Henry about his life. Where did you grow up, and what college did you go to, and about his, and Henry, because Spence was so narcissistic, he had seismic narcissism. Henry thought, like he was watching the Red Sea party, that, this narcissist was actually taking an interest in him. So, and Spence started asking him about his escort service and how he ran his escort service. And then all of a sudden Spence stood up and he motioned him, and Spence went into a closet, and behind the closet was this compartment, and then behind the compartment was a room, and it was all monitors. And Henry was there next to Spence, and then Spence hit a couple of buttons, and then Henry is there on a monitor talking about his escort service. And Spence basically said to him, I blackmail people. You're blackmailed. So that was how Henry indoctrinated into that. But, to his credit, he would not get them children. He wouldn't do it. And that ultimately, I think, led to his demise, because the Department of Justice came after him pretty hard.
Wow.
Yeah, the Department of Justice came after him because he wouldn't actually solicit people for their various rings of SA, right? Sexual abuse. So ironic, right? The U.S. government, they don't really concern themselves with much of these investigations until all of a sudden you don't participate.
Was there any justice served?
There, none whatsoever. That Franklin network, no one got indicted for molesting any children. And then there was a DC grand jury that covered it all up. Basically, Spence had killed himself. He's like Epstein. I do think now there's people that on the internet that speculate that Spence was murdered. I think Spence was told, either you kill yourself or we'll kill you. You can pick the time and the place if you kill yourself. Because his suicide was pretty bizarre. He was in the Boston Ritz-Carlton dressed in a tuxedo, and he overdosed on an antidepressant called nortriptyline. But anyway, so there were all these articles about blackmail going down by the Washington Times, and then the Washington Post was covering up for the government, saying that there was no blackmail. And but Henry Vinson, the guy was just running a gay escort service, and he was indicted on a 46-count RICO indictment. He was looking at 295 years in prison, because what the government was doing was leveraging him. They said, we know what you saw, and we know that you could hurt us, but if you talk, you're going to spend 295 years in prison. So the government made a deal with him. If you talk, you're going to spend 295 years in prison. If you keep your mouth shut, we'll just send you away for 5. So he ultimately kept his mouth shut. And it's amazing, because he was a very important interview for me when I was doing the Franklin scandal. And then he ultimately decided to write a book with me about it, which really gets into the Washington, D.C. side of things.
Wow. That's, I want to do a whole episode on that because I think it's important, but I really want to, there's so much going on with the Epstein stuff, and it's timely. It's right now. And so I want to concentrate on that for the majority of the time here. And I'd like to move into that. But I mean, I'm going to be honest, Nick, I'm worried to take the interview. I'm not going to bullshit you. I mean, I'm a former SEAL, former CIA guy, been all over the world doing dangerous shit. But this, I mean, they tried to assassinate the judge that was on the Epstein trial, correct?
There was someone who's killed her husband and son.
Yeah, he was posed as a UPS driver.
Yeah, and that was covered up pretty quickly. I never really had the time to get to the bottom of that, but that's something I'd like. The thing with this is, I've written 2 books about it. I've been screaming about it from the rooftops for quite some time. Until Epstein came along, no one was taking me seriously. But once Epstein came along, and once I published that Epstein's Black Book on the internet, people did start to take me seriously. It's something, the toothpaste is coming out of the tube now. And that's why people are willing to take it on. I mean, no one has been more vocal about Epstein than me. And I'm still kicking. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, and that's the thing, the government can't kill all of us. I mean, if the government kills me, they have a martyr. The last thing that they want is a martyr. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, there was a time when I was writing the Franklin scandal. I mean, I think that's when I was at my most vulnerable. But once the book came out, I felt pretty safe. And then what I did is every time I got a document, I disseminated it. Every time I got an interview, I disseminated it. So if something did happen to me, there was going to be a record of what I was doing.
Did you feel like that with the Epstein stuff?
With the Epstein stuff, I was kind of an old pro at it by the time I came across Epstein. When I got his Black Book, I knew that was a little dicey, for sure. But then here's the thing. I went to the mainstream media and I tried to get them to publish the Black Book, and no one would do it. And then it took me 3 years to finally get someone to publish that Black Book, because our media is it's either compromised or just unbelievably corrupt.
Who did publish it?
Gawker, which, and Gawker was a website that would take on all kinds of crazy stuff. And they ultimately got sued into oblivion by Peter Thiel, who's a billionaire who founded PayPal. And they outed Peter Thiel as a closeted gay guy. And then Peter Thiel let it be known that anybody that litigates against Gawker, he was willing to pay their entire litigation. And then Gawker ultimately released a video of Hulk Hogan having sex with, I believe, a friend of his wife. And but
I want to say something about Peter Thiel, because I brought this up before in regards to transhumanism and all types of stuff, that he was like this Trump supporter, right? Conservative. But like he said, when Gawker outed him as a homosexual, of course, he took vengeance by putting them out of business, essentially. But Peter Thiel is associated with a lot of weird stuff. And one of them is his company Ambrosia, which is where, again, some of these Hollywood celebrities, you've seen where they use foreskin and stuff. They put it on their skin to rejuvenate the cells in the various tissues in their body so that they can look younger. Well, he has a company that people can literally purchase blood from the ages of like 16 to 25 or something. And so you have to be over the age of like 35, but then you can purchase these blood infusions from younger people, because it's been demonstrated. I did a whole stream talking about modern day vampires. It's been demonstrated that ingesting human blood of younger people actually does rejuvenate your tissue and helps make you look younger. And so when you start seeing some of these wild celebrities and how they're able to somehow maintain their age despite getting older and older and older, well, they're participating in some of these practices. So I personally am not a big Peter Thiel fan, even though he's kind of held up in conservative circles as, well, look, he's a big Trump supporter. And again, and there's a lot of things about Trump I'm not so happy about. But anyways, continuing on here. Guys, smash that like for everybody who's here. And if you want to show some love, feel free to send a super chat over on Streamlabs, Dono Chat, or on YouTube.
Quote me on that. But ultimately, Hulk Hogan, I got a huge multi-million-dollar judgment against Gawker that caused him to crumble. But they were willing, they did stuff like that, but they were also willing to take stories from guys like me where no one else would touch it. And once we published that Black Book, I mean, it was huge. I mean, it got tens of thousands of hits really quickly.
I'll bet.
And then I was able to write some articles about it. And no one else in the mainstream media would have given me that opportunity.
I saw that you had a decent article in Vanity Fair, it seemed like.
Yeah, about me. Yeah.
But well, before we dive too deep into the Epstein stuff, let's take a quick break. And when we come back, we'll just dig in.
Sounds good.
Those of you that have been...
Okay, let's skip through the ad here. All right. There we go.
All right, Nick, we're back from the break. We're going to dive into everything that you can tell us about Jeffrey Epstein. Just a couple of quick things. So you've been following Epstein since 2012.
2011, 2012. Yeah.
Epstein was arrested on July 6th, 2019. Ironically, today's the day of the interview was July 6th. That's a weird coincidence. He died August 10th, 2019, roughly 1 month later. And Epstein pleaded guilty to soliciting underage girls for sex in 2008. He served only
13 months in a county jail.
Yeah, just 13 months. And
one count. Again, this was a grand jury, and the prosecutor of that grand jury was Barry Kirshner. And the Palm Beach Police Department had the statements of 5 minors who had been molested by Epstein, but they also knew, and then there were a number of corroborating statements, but they knew of 23 underage girls that had been molested by Jeffrey Epstein. And Barry Kirshner, the Florida attorney, only called one, and he totally deconstructed her. I mean,
and for some of you who dove into this stuff before too, with other people that have researched it, you know, Alexander Acosta, the guy that was hired by the Trump administration, he was wanted to prosecute Epstein, but he was told specifically that, hey, this is above your pay grade because he's intelligence. And I think this comes out in part 2. He discusses that. So it's interesting. Again, the whole Palm Beach thing, Epstein's been protected by the government for years and years and years. And in regards to, again, because his story picks up with Epstein mostly after, again, the Palm Beach thing. So this is like early 2000s into eventually the arrest in 2019. And that's where I would recommend, again, Whitney Webb's book, or even just listening to some of the interviews where she really gets into everything that was going on in the 80s and 90s, which is really fascinating.
I mean, or he could have called 25. And actually that grand jury didn't even indict him for molesting any girls. It indicted him on 1 count of adult pandering. And what happened was that Michael Ryder, who is really one of the unsung heroes in the Epstein story, he was the chief of the Palm Beach Police Department. He completely exploded. And he called this the greatest miscarriage of justice in recent history. And he went to the feds, and because he knew of 23 victims, and then he had taken heat too. I mean, he'd taken a lot. He'd been harassed, and I think found a dead animal or something like that on his front doorstep. But he's really a good guy. And the first time I was in Florida, I talked to him, and he looked me up on the internet, and he saw that I was serious about this type of stuff, and he called me back, and he wouldn't let it go. I mean, the state wanted to cover it up, the feds wanted to cover it up, but he would not let it go. And he made sure that Jeffrey Epstein got indicted at least on 1 count of solicitation of a minor or molestation of a minor.
It is hard to believe how many people are aiding and covering this up.
Yes,
especially that we don't even know about yet. But let's just start at the beginning. What got your attention on this? How did it go from the Franklin scandal to Epstein?
Well, I mean, the Franklin scandal gave me, I researched the Franklin scandal for 7 years. And I traveled thousands of miles, read thousands of pages of documentation, talked to a lot of victims. And I developed a certain expertise in that area. Wasn't really trying to initially, but just I felt I had this drive to make sure that the Franklin scandal got published, that I wrote it and that it got published. And I developed an expertise in that area of child trafficking. So I was reading about Epstein, and I read that there were other girls that knew about Epstein, or that came forward about Epstein, but he wasn't that grand jury hadn't indicted him on a single count of child molestation. And that's exactly what happened in the Franklin scandal. Nobody was indicted for child molestation, even though there were a bunch of kids. I had a list of 60 kids that have been involved in the Franklin scandal. So the exact same thing was happening with Epstein. And then so I went down there in 2012, and I started investigating, and I ended up with Epstein's Black Book. And
where did you start your investigation?
I started calling people that were involved. I called Michael Ryder. He was the police chief, the former Palm Beach Police Department police chief. I called people that had covered it in the newspapers.
Was he part of the cover-up?
Michael Ryder? No, he was part of it getting exposed.
Okay.
Yeah, he was like Mr. Stand-Up guy and all this. I mean, if it hadn't been for him, we wouldn't be here talking. Epstein would be rolling right now and trafficking girls. I'm pretty convinced. But he made such a stink about it that he made sure that the feds got involved. So then the feds had to cover it up. But when I got Epstein's Black Book, there was scores of victims.
Well, let's talk about the journey to get his Black Book. So how did it happen? I mean, I don't think you just show up and say, hey, can I take a look at that?
Hey guys, I also just want to remind everybody to smash that like. And if you have any comments or questions, or you want to say something for it to be brought up on the screen there, feel free to send it a super chat using YouTube or Streamlabs or Dono Chat. I'd greatly appreciate all the support. As I said, this one's not going to be able to be monetized through ads, so I'm not going to be able to make any money through the ads on this one. But I appreciate all you guys for being here and having the stomach to listen to another very difficult topic, as was the last one with Rachel on some of the witch talk stuff. So I appreciate you guys. God bless you all.
How did you get access to that?
You cultivate relationships. Like with the Franklin scandal, I actually got some people in federal law enforcement to give me information.
Okay.
It took me some time. But once I see that your aim is true, and they don't think that you're going to snitch on them for helping you, that you're stand-up, then they'll help you. And someone took that chance with me and gave me the Black Book. And then I was down in Florida, and then I started calling. I wanted to get victims first. I mean, that was my first concern, was because there was like long lists of victims. And so I started calling these victims, and then they started telling me about being flown to different places into his island with other girls.
Well, let's get a little more in depth. So how many victims did you talk to?
At that point, I talked to, I believe, 4.
How were they soliciting them? How did the approach happen?
With Epstein just he would get girls and pay them like $200 to get other girls. So, and that's exactly how it works with Franklin, where if you bring someone in, they'll pay you money.
Okay.
So, and he just had this huge machine that was funneling girls. I mean, he had all these girls and procurers looking for other girls.
How young did the girls go?
Okay, so the mainstream media has said 14, but I don't think that that's true.
That's inaccurate.
We're talking as young as 11 or 12.
11 or 12?
Yes. And actually, I believe that one of the victims that litigated against Epstein was 13 at the time. So the mainstream media has done such a disservice to these girls because it has sanitized that trafficking network. I mean, those girls were younger than 14, definitely. And the viciousness that some of them were subjected to. I mean, some of these, and I saw this in the Franklin scandal, some of these guys like to beat up these little boys or little girls. I mean, and some of these guys are unbelievably powerful. You would know their names. And that's what they like to do. That's how they get off.
Do you know the names?
Some of them, yeah.
Are they in the Black Book?
Yes.
Who are they?
Yes. One of them is a former prime minister. And he, according to one victim I talked to, liked to beat up victims.
Why don't you want to say the name? I'm just curious.
I think that just the information that I've given you is enough for someone to basically determine who he is.
Where could they find the names?
Okay, so Gawker published the Black Book. It's online. If you Google Nick Bryant Gawker Black Book, it'll be there.
It's out there.
And actually, this gentleman.
Well, let's give it a try. If anybody finds a website specifically on that, let's see, was it Gawker? If anybody knows a good link, let me know. I don't think it's on his website. Mm-hmm. I don't see it. If anybody out there knows the link, send it to me. I'd be interested to pull it up. I am not finding it. Anybody know how to exactly spell Gawker? Is it Gwaker? Let me just double check. Gawker. What was it? Yeah. I don't know. I don't know, guys. If anybody has the link, feel free to send it to me. I'd be okay. Gawker. Gawker. Aha. Gawker, Nick Bryant, Black Book. Yeah. Where can we find it? Where can we? Interesting. All right. Well, if you guys find a link, feel free to send it to me. Oh, here we go. Okay, here we go. So this is aha. Look at here. So we got Steve Benson, Tony Blair. Aha. I wonder if this is the prime minister he's talking about. David Blaine. What the heck? You know, one of the interesting things in Whitney Webb's conversation with Patrick Bet-David is she highlights that Elon Musk had a weird relationship with Ghislaine Maxwell, and that his brother had a strange relationship with Epstein, and that Epstein was given permission to basically roam the grounds of Tesla. Again, I've told you before, I'm very skeptical of Elon Musk as some sort of superhero. Here's Flavio Briatore. He's circled. Jean-Luc Brunel. Naomi Campbell was in his black book, the model. Wow. Interesting stuff here. You guys being able to see all this? Yeah, he makes a point of the ones that were circled were ones that they had like direct evidence of. So, yeah, Lex Luthor. Okay. Very interesting stuff. If anybody wants me to look up a specific name, I wonder if Mohammed bin what's his name? Mohammed bin Salman of Saudi Arabia. I know he's one of them. Thank you so much, Slow Boy, for sharing this. God bless you, sister. We got Tom Hanks in here. Where's the H's at? Tom Hanks has to be in here. Let's see. Hanks would have been right through here. I guess not. Wow. Interesting. Interesting stuff. So you guys kind of get it. I'm not going to bore you by going through here, but I will share this link with everybody. So if anybody wants to check this out, I'm sharing the link in the live chat to all the platforms. You guys can go look it up yourself. Yeah, we know, dude. This is the black book. It has to do with the phone numbers. We know. I'm Bobby Kennedy, Bobby and Mary Kennedy, interesting. Ted Jr., interesting. Multiple Kennedys in there. Uh-huh. Oh, the Koch brothers. Let's go down to interesting stuff. All right. So let's get back to the interview here. Thank you so much. Hugo Nava throws in $5. Says, "You got balls, my friend." Amen. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. And if they do anything, well, then, it's kind of out in the open, and I'm not the first one. People know way more about this stuff than I do. I'm just trying to publicize it to my audience. So I appreciate you, Hugo Nava. Thank you very much, brother, for the $5 super chat. God bless you, man. You stay safe. All right, and I'll just take this opportunity to see if we got any more super chats. Looks like we got $5 over on the Dono chat by Blue Skittle. Says, "No message entered by user." Well, thank you very much, Blue Skittle, for the $5 super chat. And it looks like that is all the super chats. So let's just get back to the conversation here.
And it's circled. Alfredo Rodriguez was the house manager.
Well, hold on. Before we get into all that, where were they flying these girls? And who would they fly with?
These girls were flown everywhere, and they were flown with politicians.
How many at a time?
It all depends, because we don't really know. I mean, we've got passenger manifests, but it's hard to know how honest. But there was definitely, like Alan Dershowitz. He said that he'd never flown with Jeffrey Epstein. And in the article that I wrote for Gawker, he's on a passenger manifest with Tatiana and Claire, and Alan Dershowitz said, "I've never molested any of these girls, blah, 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 blah." And then he's nailed, though.
Who is that? I don't know who.
Alan Dershowitz is a famous attorney.
Okay.
That was part of the Jeffrey Epstein network. And he got nailed. I mean, he said that he only flew with, actually, he's one of the most famous attorneys in the world. There's been, I think it was Reverse La Fortune, about Klaus von Bülow, who he was convicted or arraigned for killing his very wealthy wife, and Alan Dershowitz represented him. So, and he is was a leading scholar at Harvard, legal scholar at Harvard, and he was a good friend of Jeffrey Epstein's. And one of the girls that has come forward and said that she was molested by Alan Dershowitz. Another girl has said that she wasn't a minor, but she had been pandered to Alan Dershowitz. And then another woman has said, another Epstein victim has said that Epstein had a house in New York, and that there would be quote unquote model auditions in the second floor, and there'd be young girls there. And Alan Dershowitz went right up the stairs to where the young models were being auditioned.
So they would fly these young girls 11 to, let's just say 11 on up.
I mean, some of them were 18, 19, 20, 21.
Okay.
I mean, the thing is, Epstein liked girls that were like 13 or 14. But if you wanted someone that was younger, I mean, Epstein is a psychopath.
Mm-hmm.
If you wanted someone that was younger, he didn't have any problem with that. If you wanted someone that was older, he didn't have a problem with that either. I mean, he had the type of girls that he liked. But if you were part of that network, you'd get anything you wanted.
So where all would they fly him to? Obviously his island.
T. Sanders throws in $2. Says, "Thanks, David. May our Lord helps you in your work." Well, thank you very much, T. Sanders, for the $2 super chat. I do appreciate it, and obviously taking a little bit of risk doing this stream. So if anybody wants to show some love, please do. I'd appreciate that. And if you don't have any money, pray for me. Pray for me, my work, and my family. I'd be greatly appreciative of all those. So if you don't have any extra bucks to spare, please spare me a prayer. I'd greatly appreciate that. But thank you very much, T. Sanders, for the $2 super chat.
And where else?
Some were flown to Los Angeles. I've got a bunch of passenger manifests too.
Did he just have houses everywhere?
He had houses. He had a house in Palm Beach. He had a house in New York City. He had the island, and then he had a place in a huge place in New Mexico. And there is a girl that has come forward in a deposition, and she said that she had been molested by both Bill Richardson and Bruce King, and both of them had been former governors of New Mexico. And actually, Bill Richardson was a Democratic high flyer. He was Bill Clinton's energy czar. And what's really interesting is Epstein had to register as a sex offender everywhere except New Mexico. So obviously, some people very high up in the New Mexico political machinery were doing favors for Jeffrey Epstein. And according to one of the victims, she was molested by 2 former governors of New Mexico.
So was everywhere just all of his properties were involved in this? It wasn't one specific one?
No, I mean, Epstein, I think, and he had a place in the UK, he had a place in France. I mean, this was his business.
How many girls do you estimate were involved in this from start to finish?
Oh man, it's tough. Like Epstein, just himself was, as his addiction accelerated, he was like 3 girls a day. So, but then you get in, so, you're looking at Epstein, 3 girls a day, but then you're looking at all these guys that he pandered girls to. Hundreds. And he was doing, now granted, like when he probably started in the mid 90s or early 90s, he wasn't as full throttle as he was in the early 2000s. But he had a run there of 25 years where he was trafficking girls. And just his own personal deviant appetites were 3 a day. So that kind of gives you an idea of how massive that trafficking network was.
How did he get started?
How did Epstein get started?
How did he get started?
Where
did he come from?
He comes from Coney Island, from a working class family in Coney Island. And I've heard stuff about him that he could have been chosen earlier to be part of this as a young man. So he was a college dropout, and he got a job teaching math at Dalton, which is the most prestigious school in New York City.
Who would have recruited him at a young age?
I do not know. It's one of those things like with King and Spence, they were in Southeast Asia, and then they come back to America, and then all of a sudden their star rises. The same thing with Epstein. We do not know.
Who do you have any?
I do not know. William Barr, the Attorney General under Donald Trump, who covered up Epstein, and actually he covered up Franklin too, because he was the Attorney General under Bush 1 when the Franklin scandal was covered up. So he's a really dirty guy. I mean, and he's been involved in all kinds of other dirty stuff too. His dad was running Dalton shortly before Epstein got hired there. So people have speculated that his dad had something to do with Epstein getting hired, but we don't really know. But what's really interesting is William Barr's father wrote a sci-fi novel about intergalactic sex trafficking, which is kind of strange. And then Jeffrey Epstein ends up working at Dalton, and then he gets involved in with a number of trading companies, and then ultimately,
I mean, how does he get involved though?
Well, that's the thing.
He's a college dropout. He gets put in there by Barr's. I'm sorry, you said Barr's father.
People are surmising that it's Barr's father who got him a job at Dalton. And then he was in some trading companies. He was with Stephen Hoffenberg, who got busted. At that time, Hoffenberg was guilty of the largest Ponzi scheme ever. It was before Bernie Madoff. Now with Hoffenberg, I met with Hoffenberg. He's dead now, but he said that Epstein was involved, but Epstein was allowed to skate. But the thing with Hoffenberg is he was a very, very wealthy guy who did 18 years in prison. And I don't think he came out of prison as the paragon of sanity. So I never really knew what to make about what Hoffenberg was telling me. Okay. It could have been all true, or I don't know, but I think that Stephen Hoffenberg was psychologically troubled. And after he got out of prison. But where Epstein got his big break was in the early 90s. Les Wexner, who is the head of the Limited, Victoria's Secret, multi-billionaire, he gave Epstein the keys to his kingdom, power of attorney over everything. And Epstein was allowed to do whatever he wanted with Les Wexner's fortune. Anything he wanted. He was given power of attorney.
I mean, but he didn't. I mean, he barely even knew him, correct?
They'd known each other for I don't know. I mean, 5 or 6 years. But I think Les Wexner is a pretty dirty guy. I mean, he's also been named as a perpetrator, and I do believe that he is a perpetrator. And he and Jeffrey Epstein. Les Wexner has a very interesting history. He's got a history with the mafia. There was an attorney whose law firm worked for Les Wexner's Limited. His name was Arthur Shapiro, and he was shot in the back of the head twice, execution style, in Columbus, Ohio, which is where Wexner lives and where the Limited is headquartered. So, it was very much a mafia hit, and there was a police report, a homicide report. I've got it, that came out, and it named Les Wexner as the chief suspect of that homicide. And it talked about all of Les Wexner's mafia connections, which I was able to corroborate. The police chief of Columbus ordered that homicide report to be destroyed. But I got a copy of it. So I'm good at. But yeah, Les Wexner is the prime suspect.
Want to stop real quick? We got a super chat that came in. A major thank you goes out to Trained Logos Motion. Throws in a super chat of $10. Says thank you for your hard work, David. Risky business tonight. Yes, exactly. So I appreciate, again, if anybody wants to show some love and support for tonight's stream. Wanted to again make all this stuff out in the open for you. They said prayers for you and your family. God bless, brother. Well, thank you so much. Trained Logos Motion. I appreciate your prayers, and I appreciate your $10 super chat. Thank you so much. Me and my family are greatly appreciative. So thank you. All right.
As far as being the prime mover of that homicide, according to that homicide report.
Why do you think? I mean, what was his fortune?
He's estimated to be worth at least $4 billion.
Why would he? I mean, is it blackmail? Why would he hand over the keys and give full power of attorney to Jeff Epstein, other than blackmail? Do you think it was blackmail?
It's either blackmail or they're both into something very sordid together. And here's what people don't understand about Epstein, and they didn't understand this about Franklin. Jeffrey Epstein was blackmailing some of the most powerful men in the world.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, all you got to do is look at his black book and see that he was blackmailing some of the most powerful men in the world. Now, Jeffrey Epstein was a college dropout from working class Coney Island. Is Jeffrey Epstein going to be able to blackmail Les Wexner, who has connections to the mafia? There's no way in hell. I mean, Jeffrey Epstein would have a very brief life expectancy if he did that. But the thing about it is, if he's got an intelligence apparatus behind him,
mm-hmm.
and they make it known to whoever he's blackmailing, no one touches Jeffrey Epstein, or else pictures are going to come out, or whatever. I mean, that's the only way that Jeffrey Epstein is able to blackmail.
So you think that Jeffrey Epstein had an intelligence organization behind him?
Oh, absolutely.
More than
no
one.
Doubt about it.
U.S. intelligence organization or another country's?
Well, yeah, okay. So people speculate that it was Israeli and not American. But here's the thing about that, and I try to explain it to people. There's no way that American intelligence is going to let Israeli intelligence compromise American politicians without getting a cut of that intelligence. There's just no way.
I mean, why wouldn't they? If Jeffrey Epstein has blackmail on literally all these powerful people, I mean, it seems that they all fold immediately. You know, maybe he had something on the U.S. side of things, and they were like, hey.
All right, guys, that's the end of part one. We're going to dive into part two in just a moment. 1 foot out the door, throws in $5 Canadian, says, for tackling the tough subjects. Well, thank you so much. 1 foot out the door. I do appreciate that. Thank you very much. Yeah, as other people highlighted, my personal thoughts in regard is Epstein alive or not. I suspect that he very well could be. Again, I wouldn't be surprised if they killed him, but also I certainly wouldn't be surprised if Bill Barr was ahead of a cover-up to allow him to escape, and that in fact he is still alive somewhere. potentially Israel. That would make most sense. Based on my experience looking into this stuff, I absolutely believe he was working with Mossad. That's no doubt. Were American intelligence agencies involved? Yeah, probably. But certainly I lean towards the side that Israeli intelligence was much more involved, in that these honeypot operations for blackmail were sort of normal practice, if you will. So very interesting stuff. Let's get into part 2. Looks like nobody has sent anything in, so let's go over here to part 2 and begin the second half of this conversation.
Like I called Michael Ryder.
Was he part of the cover-up?
He was part of it getting exposed.
Okay.
Yeah, he was like Mr. Stand-Up guy in all this. I mean, if it hadn't been for him, we wouldn't be here talking. People speculate that it was Israeli, not American. But here's the thing about that, and I try to explain it to people. There's no way that American intelligence is going to let Israeli intelligence compromise American politicians without getting a cut of that intelligence. There's just no way.
I mean, why wouldn't they? If Jeffrey Epstein has blackmail on literally all these powerful people.
Yeah, Corey makes a point. Intelligence all merges into the same entity the further you climb up. Yeah, I totally agree with that. So I'm not one to suspect that U.S. intelligence or Mossad or whoever it may be is the end-all be-all in regards to these operations. I believe the people who are really behind it are people that we will never, ever know their name, because that's the point, and that's why we have so many public figures to sort of be scapegoated in certain regards. So, yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And so let me know in the live chats if you guys are following, whether you think Epstein is still alive or that he was actually killed, or if you actually think he killed himself. I'd be interested if anybody believes the official narrative. But anyways, let's move on here and get into part 2.
Well, here's what happened. Okay, so when that state grand jury didn't indict Epstein on any counts of child abuse, Michael Ryder of the Palm Beach Police Department was just livid. And he went to the feds and he said, you guys have got to do something about this. And at a certain point, the feds accumulated a list of 36 victims. I've got the list. The feds had a list of 36 victims. Alexander Acosta was the U.S. attorney for the Southern District of Florida, Miami. And he was told that not to go after Epstein, that Epstein was intelligence and it was above his pay grade. Now, he said that when he became Secretary of Labor under Trump. And when the Trump team was vetting him, they asked him, why didn't you go after Epstein? And he said, well, I was told that Epstein was intelligence and it was above my pay grade, not to go after him. And it has come out that he said that, and he's never denied saying that. So he was told Epstein is intelligence and you need to back away from him. And that's exactly, and so when we're talking about power, this is a U.S. attorney. There's two people constitutionally that can tell a U.S. attorney to back down in the United States of America, the president and the attorney general. So that's the kind of power that Epstein was tapped into, that a U.S. attorney could be told to stand down.
Wow. So what was his name? Lesnar?
Les Wexner.
Les Wexner. Was he the gateway to all the other powerful people that Epstein had intertwined into this web of elites?
I think that he was one of the gateways. I think that Epstein probably had multiple gateways, like Leon Black, head of the Apollo Group. Epstein got $156 million from him. And how did that happen? Well, Leon Black just happens to be in Jeffrey Epstein's black book. Glenn Dubin, another billionaire. He's actually circled. So what happened was the house manager ripped off Epstein's black book. This is how I ended up getting it. The house manager ripped it off and he tried to sell it to one of the attorneys that was launching civil suits at Epstein. And then the attorney called the FBI and the FBI did a sting. But he circled a bunch of names that he saw had been involved with Epstein.
Epstein circled him, or the house manager?
The house manager did.
Okay.
So Les Wexner's name is definitely circled. Bill Richardson's name is circled. Bruce King's name is circled. Glenn Dubin's name is circled. George Mitchell, the former majority leader of the Senate, his name is circled. Marvin Minsky, a famous scientist at MIT, his name is circled. And actually, and a number of these people come up in the depositions, a victim's deposition, when she names names.
So these names are popping up all over the place.
Yeah.
And it's all syncing up.
Yeah, I mean, it's and one of the circled names is Ehud Barak, the former prime minister of Israel. So,
any president's names in there?
well, actually, Epstein has, I believe, 24 contact numbers for Clinton. And
so interesting. Prime Minister of Israel was circled. Want to give a major thank you to Gary. He throws in a generous $50 donated super chat over on Streamlabs. Thank you so much, Gary. God bless you, brother, and thank you very much for that generous super chat. I truly do appreciate it. Let me check the dono chat real quick while we have a pause in the action. Looks like nothing over there. So we're going to get back to it. Thank you all so much. Smash that like if you guys are enjoying this content, and let's get back into it.
And it's very obvious that Epstein was providing girls to Clinton. I mean, when Clinton was president, Epstein was going into the White House with girls, with women. I don't think that they were minors, but Epstein was definitely delivering women to Clinton when Clinton was in the White House.
What's with the painting? You know the painting?
Yeah, about? With Clinton in the blue dress. It's
what is that?
It's Jeffrey Epstein's perverted sense of humor towards Bill Clinton, I guess. I'm sure that Clinton probably never saw it.
What other kind of paintings were there? Was anybody else we know?
No, nothing like that.
Okay.
Nothing like Bill Clinton in a blue dress, which kind of is a frightening thought.
Is that the...
Well, there is another one that I wanted to highlight. This is Clinton in the blue dress. Maybe it highlights that in regards to some of these parties, he was, in fact, a cross-dresser. I wouldn't be surprised about that. But how many of you have seen the one that that Jeffrey Epstein also had of... where is it? Aha, right here. Of George W. Bush, where he had 2 paper airplanes in the Oval Office and 2 Jenga towers were fallen down. Very interesting painting that Jeffrey Epstein would have of former President George W. Bush, again, who was president during the 9/11 tragedy. So interesting. A very interesting painting, again, we see from Epstein. So I just wanted to throw that out there. Let's continue on.
Yeah, we'll put it up on screen. It's a great painting.
Yeah, well, very good painting, yeah.
But I don't know why you want that painted. But keep going with the Black Book. I have so many questions that have...
Well, with the Black Book, so I got the Black Book, and like I had direct contact information to Bill Clinton, or Mick Jagger's name was in there. The Kennedys. There was a Rothschild. I mean, Soros's nephew, who's kind of taking over the Soros empire. He's circled in the Black Book. So,
how many names are in the Black Book?
I would say a couple hundred, 200, 300. I mean, I'm talking like people that Epstein did business with, but then there's also the names of probably about 150 victims too.
So if you had to describe the Black Book, how would you describe it? I mean, was it handwritten? Was it typed?
No, it was typed out. It was Epstein's basically all the connections that Epstein had made.
It was just a Rolodex of people.
Yeah, and like a thing that kind of indicates guilt, and I'm not saying that categorical guilt, but it indicates guilt, is the more numbers that Epstein had for you. Even if you weren't sort of like George Mitchell was named by a victim as a perpetrator.
Who's George Mitchell?
He was the he was the Democratic head of the Senate. When the Democrats, this is in the 1990s, when the Democrats had the majority, he was the majority leader of the Democrats. So he constitutionally was the president pro tempore, which makes so if the president goes and the vice president goes and the speaker of the House goes, then the majority leader of the Senate takes over. So constitutionally, he was the 4th most powerful man in the country. And Epstein has like 7 numbers for him. And then that girl came forward and said that she'd been molested. And, here's the thing about this, though. Some of these guys, I mean, some of them are creepy. Like Alan Dershowitz is creepy. Les Wexner is creepy.
I agree. Alan Dershowitz is a very creepy guy, and I find him guilty Well, again, I don't have anything to prove it, but just he's so weird. His mannerisms. Have you ever seen him sort of defend himself? I mean, he's advocated for the lowering of the age of consent. Again, makes you really wonder.
But George Mitchell, he looks like a benign grandfather. I mean, I believe that victim, and then Epstein was obviously doing business with him. He had like 7 numbers for George Mitchell, but he doesn't look creepy. It's weird. You know, some of these guys are very creepy and they don't look creepy. A lot of them look creepy, but some of them just don't.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, was there any notes or annotations or anything beside the names, or was it literally just like a phone book, a name, and then whatever numbers they had for them?
Yeah, numbers.
Okay.
And then Alfredo Rodriguez circled the ones that he had witnessed in Florida taking part.
Was it all men?
Courtney Love's name is circled. And I think Naomi Campbell's name might be circled too.
Were there any boys that were victims? Or was it all women or young girls?
So I have heard of boys, but I've yet to find them at this point. But I've heard of them.
Are the victims? Let's talk about what it was like when you spoke with some of the victims. Were they eager to get information out? Were they scared? Were they standoffish?
They're scared. I mean, in this scenario, you've got Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell saying, you know, if you talk, you're going to die.
Mm-hmm.
And then you see all these extremely powerful guys. You see the Prime Minister of Israel, or you see Bill Clinton. I mean, you know, these are people at the apex of power.
Mm-hmm.
And Epstein and Maxwell have told you, if you talk, you're going to die. And then you see these powerful guys, you're terrified.
What about Bill Gates?
Okay, so now here's what's interesting about Bill Gates. Our mainstream media, which has been very lackadaisical, covering Jeffrey Epstein, said that they met in 2011, I think. So, but there was actually an article from the Evening Standard in the UK from 2001 that said that Epstein and Gates were doing business in the 1990s. So chances are, if that article is correct, Epstein and Gates knew each other like approximately 20 years before our mainstream media. Our mainstream media has just washed this up, cleaned it up. It's pretty disgusting.
Well, don't quote me on this, because I think all of mainstream media is completely corrupt. Doesn't matter if it's on the right side, doesn't matter if it's on the left side. There is no middle side. But you know, I believe it was an ABC correspondent that got fired, who came out and said that she wanted to cover the story, and right before she went on to cover it, it was, hey, cut it. We're not doing this.
Yeah,
we're not going to cover it. And do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes. Yeah.
Did that happen? I mean, that's the only one that I've seen that's actually public.
It could have happened in other situations, but it's difficult to know. I mean, because again, we're talking, why are people covering up for Jeffrey Epstein? Because they don't want to lose what they have, and they're afraid of not getting what they want. And that's a strong motivator for people, a very strong motivator. Mm-hmm. Their mortgage payments, their car payments, the payments for their children's college. These are very strong motivators for people not to do their job. Because in Epstein, we see a lot of people not doing their job, and they're afraid. They're not like Michael Ryder, the chief of the Palm Beach Police Department. They're not like him, who's going to do what's right. They're gonna weigh this.
Man, I feel like this country used to be full of people who do what's right.
Well, and they're out there. We just have to start collecting them, getting them together, giving them one voice. I believe that there's enough people that are out there that really want to do the right thing, but they haven't been offered a modality to do that. And that's why Epstein Justice, this organization that I've started, is so important, because we want to start getting the message out to people and say it's all right to come forward. Actually, it's our duty to come forward. Our government is aiding and abetting child trafficking in the case of Jeffrey Epstein. And like, let's say someone lived down the block from you and you knew that they were aiding and abetting child trafficking. I mean, you would never trust them. You would never let your kids near them. And here our government is aiding and abetting child trafficking. I mean, so how can we trust our government? We've reached a point where we cannot trust our government. If our government is that corrupt, we can no longer trust the government.
Yeah, I don't think that's
I know I don't trust the government for anything. I think most people should recognize that the greatest threat to you and your family is the federal government. And if anybody's familiar with the infrastructure they put in place for combating domestic terrorism, this began with the Patriot Act after 9/11. This all has to do with the fact that you are enemy number one to the federal government. Anybody who has any sort of remote traditional Christian values, promotes U.S. nationalism, prefers, again, domestic made products. These are threats to the system, and the terrorist or the domestic terrorist infrastructure that's being set up is to target you. Some of you may have seen the latest neo-Nazi rally, and what was it, in Madison, Wisconsin, where all these guys walked around. Of course, they have their faces covered, they have swastikas, all this different stuff. These are feds. This is about, again, perpetuating the narrative that the greatest threat to the United States are, again, neo-Nazi, white supremacists, MAGA supporters. No matter what you think about Donald Trump or not, that's irrelevant. It has to do with, again, the combating and the targeting. And that's why you see what's happened to the J6ers. Again, and the J6 tapes have just been released. Thank God. And so it showed that the entire narrative we were told is false. And those people have been in solitary confinement, some of them for months in solitary confinement. In fact, they were let in by Capitol Police. And so our government is the greatest enemy to us. It's not anything overseas. Not that the people overseas aren't wanting to do us harm. They absolutely do. But our government's working with them. That's for darn sure.
If our government is that corrupt, I think it's our government is that corrupt in multiple arenas.
But here's the thing. With Epstein justice, if we dig down into Epstein, we will come across the cesspool that I believe is contaminating other large parts of the government. And then that's where we can make meaningful change. At that point is we have to make sure that the government indicts those perpetrators, indicts those procurers, and tells us why, tells the American people why it covered up Jeffrey Epstein.
Let's go back to the victims. I got sidetracked there for a minute. So were any of the victims eager to be forthcoming?
No. Every victim was, and I've gotten to know a number of them. They're reluctant to talk.
Were any of the victims? How long did it take to get names out of them? A while. You know, it's like anything else where you've got to develop trust. But I've done this before. I've done it actually quite a bit at this point. I mean, not only the Franklin scandal, but I've talked to lots of victims. So I've got a track record out there. You know, if here's a guy that does the right thing, that investigates this and does the right thing. So and there was an Epstein victim that actually read the Franklin scandal. So she realized that, you know, I was very concerned about this and really willing to do whatever it takes to get this out there, to get this information out there. So she was she offered me names. And then I've gotten to know others that have also offered names too. But they don't, you know, these were little girls, man, that were terrorized. And Epstein and Maxwell were, you know, they were vicious to these girls. I mean, some of these guys that were, you know, were violent, but Epstein and Maxwell were just mentally vicious. In what ways?
To these girls. Oh man, you know, they would make one girl like stand on a scale in front of a bunch of other girls at the island to make sure that, you know, I mean, the mind games that were played. I mean, like some of these girls that ended up at that island, they didn't even know. I mean, like Juliette Bryant, she was in South Africa and she met someone who knew Epstein. And then all of a sudden she was on a trip to watch Bill Clinton and Jeffrey Epstein and Kevin Spacey in South Africa. Bill Clinton was going to deliver a message in South Africa. And then someone with Epstein said, you know, you're beautiful. Let's make you a model. Come to New York. So she comes to New York, and then the day that she arrives in New York, she gets a call. I believe it's from Sarah Kellen, who should also be doing multiple lifetimes in prison, saying, we're going to the island now. Pack your stuff, we're going to the island. And then, so she gets on Jeffrey Epstein's plane. She's been in New York, She hasn't been near it for a full day. She gets on Jeffrey Epstein's plane, and then they're flying to the island, and then all of a sudden, Jeffrey Epstein has one of the girls perform oral sex on him in front of all the other girls. And what's she going to do? I mean, here's a terrified young woman who is, 35,000 feet up in the air going to an island. I mean, what is she going to do? She's never been in anything like this before. She's terrified. And that's the viciousness.
So was it like a kidnapping? Were these women kidnapped? Could they go home at the end of the day? Or were they stuck on this island and his other properties? I mean, what was the living dynamic?
They could go home, but here's the thing. It's like, cults. Cults keep people tethered to that organization, like the Unification Church or the Hare Krishna. Heavens, I mean, these cult leaders, there's a very charismatic person there. So these girls, I mean, some of them are like one and done and they're out of there, but a lot of them, they're well, we're going to pay for your college, or we're going to make sure that you become a famous artist, or we're going to make sure that you become a famous actress. I mean, none of all these carrots were dangled in front of these girls. And these girls thought, well, after they'd already been indoctrinated, they thought, if I just endure this a little bit longer, then they're going to give me this, or I'm going to get that. But none of those promises ever materialized for any of those girls. It was, and that's the mind game of it too, is vicious. I mean, everything, when it had anything to do with Epstein and Maxwell, it was just categorically vicious to these girls. Whether they were being pandered to dirty old men or men that like to beat them up, and just the mind games with Epstein. I mean, being flown, coming from South Africa to New York City and being in New York City for less than a day, and then being told you're being flown to the island, and then all of a sudden you're on this island, and what do you've got no choice, really.
I mean, how do some of the victims describe daily life on the island?
Hellish. I mean, they had to sleep in like a dormitory, and then they would be called for. And then sometimes, like with one of them who was ostensibly having weight problems, they would be just ridiculed in front of the rest of the girls.
Just humiliated.
Yeah.
How many times a day would they have to perform sexual acts?
It all depends on who was there. And then they were expected to perform on Epstein too. And however many times Epstein wanted them to perform. So yeah, it was, I mean, once you were there, I mean, and a number of very powerful people were on that island. And these girls knew that. Sergey Brin, one of the founders of Google, was quite fond of Jeffrey Epstein. And but there were other people other than Sergey Brin.
There was a lot of
You guys know who Sergey Brin is? I hope you do. Sergey, how do you spell his name? It's like just IN. This is Mr. Google. Sergey Brin, big fan of Jeffrey Epstein. He is the co-founder of Google with Larry Page. He was the president of Google's parent company, Alphabet Inc., until stepping down from the role on December 3rd, 2019. There's something interesting happened in 2019. I think it's related to today's video. Very, very interesting. Very, very interesting. Yeah, I think you guys get it.
Hollywood celebrities as well.
Well, there were Hollywood celebrities. Epstein was more into politicians and power. I think people know about Hollywood Babylon, but they don't know about Sodom and Gomorrah on the Potomac. But with Epstein and also with the Franklin scandal, I mean, they pandered kids to Hollywood people, but they were primarily focused on financial people and political people.
Interesting.
But here's the thing with Hollywood. I mean, there's plenty of freaks that are pandering girls to people in Hollywood.
Yeah. We just talked to Jim Caviezel a little bit about that. I'm hoping to talk a lot more about that with him in the future. But let's take a quick break.
Sounds good. I have to go to the bathroom again. My prostate says the size of a softball is.
All right. Let's take a break.
All right, moving forward, skipping, add, okay, here we go.
Firecracker.farm/Sahwn. Check them out. All right, Nick, we're back from the break. We're talking about some of the names in the Black Book, and there have been a lot.
Before we get back into it, we have a couple super chats that just came in. Again, major thank you to everybody who has supported. Let me pull this one up real quick. This is over on the Streamlabs. Shout out to Tinfoil Hat Girl, throws in $5. Thank you so much, Tinfoil Hat Girl, for your support lately. Really appreciate it. She says, I would encourage everyone to read Whitney Webb's book, One Nation Under Blackmail. Yeah, I've been highlighting that at the beginning. Both books, it is not only highlights Epstein, but exposes his vast financial crimes and how our government is too in detail. Jeff is just a small piece of the puzzle. Yeah, I have been telling people to check out those books. Her research is fantastic. Again, if you haven't, I'll pull that up one more time. So that is right here. Again, One Nation Under Blackmail. You can get it on Amazon. Came out last year, actually on my birthday, September 22nd, and it's pretty cheap. Paperback's only $21.20. Looks like you can even get cheaper used copies if you'd like. So check that out. I highly recommend that research. Thank you so much, Tinfoil Hat Girl, for recommending it and for your support. God bless you.
A lot of names that have been released by different sources. Maybe it all came from you originally, but was every name in that book guilty of partaking in sexual activities with minors?
No, there were a number of people in that book that were not. That book was just a book of all of Jeffrey Epstein's contacts, and stolen by the Alfredo Rodriguez, who was the house manager. But a lot of the people, I mean, that was Jeffrey Epstein's thing. I mean, his thing was making money and molesting children. I mean, that was, so if you're in that Black Book, I mean, and Jeffrey Epstein's relationships were all utilitarian. I mean, he wouldn't, if you couldn't help him make money or molest children, he wouldn't have anything to do with you. So a lot of people in that Black Book are therefore making money, or they're prestigious.
Do you think there's anybody that has been painted in a negative light because their name was in that Black Book that possibly maybe shouldn't have been? I mean, it seems like anybody who's associated with this guy, I've seen pictures of celebrities and presidents and with him at parties, but I mean, and people get outraged, but I mean, when you go to parties, I mean, it's easy for anybody just to snap a picture of you standing next to whoever. You might not even know who they are. And so I'm just curious if there's anybody in particular that you think that has been defamed because of their association with them, maybe not even realizing who he was.
When people ask me that question, I think of that Beatles line, see how they run. Mm-hmm. According to everybody who's been interviewed in that book, no one had anything to do with Jeffrey Epstein.
Good point.
I mean, like, I met Jeffrey Epstein 6 years ago at such and such's party, and I don't know how I ended up in that Black Book. I mean, that's what everybody's going to say, or most people are going to say. Alan Dershowitz, who was quoted as having a friendship with Jeffrey Epstein and Vanity Fair article, I think from 2002. Oh, yeah, I barely, and he's on Jeffrey Epstein's flight manifests, and he talks about how much he loves Jeffrey Epstein and how Jeffrey Epstein reads all his books. And, oh, yeah, I think I saw Jeffrey Epstein in 2015. I mean, these people are obviously lying. Mm-hmm. I mean, they want to do everything they can to distance themselves. And Jeffrey Epstein is the same as, like, Craig Spence in the Franklin scandal. Everybody who was anybody came to Craig Spence's parties. And Craig Spence is quoted as saying, well, how will they deny that they ever came to my party? And I'm sure that Epstein, I've heard that Epstein had said something like that. Well, how can they deny that, that I didn't, because I was with the elite of society.
So where is this?
Yeah, 1 foot out the door. I saw this too. I don't know how true it is, but I did see the rumor that Trump met Melania through Epstein. I again don't know if that's true. I've heard multiple stories. I've heard Donald Trump got upset finding out about some of this stuff and didn't want anything to do with Epstein. I know he's been on the Lolita Express a couple of times. I'm not sure. I know there's the photos from like the 90s or something. I'm not sure the relationship between there, but I have seen that. What's interesting is a lot of the people who are wrapped up in this also hate Donald Trump. I don't know what to take from that. Could be just that they hate the sort of base, the nationalist, American nationalist MAGA base that supports Donald Trump. Not sure. A lot of different things going on there, but certainly interesting nonetheless.
Where is the black book now?
The FBI has it. The FBI did a sting. Alfredo Rodriguez, we talked about a little bit earlier. He wanted to sell the black book to one of the attorneys that was launching civil suits at Jeffrey Epstein that was representing some of the victims. And he called the attorney, and the attorney called the FBI, and the FBI did a sting. And so the FBI has the black book. I was fortunate enough to get a copy of it. And then that was a copy that I released in 2015.
So the FBI has the black book. They've done nothing with it.
Well, no one's here's Epstein's when Epstein got taken down 4 years ago, the FBI opened a safe, and he had hundreds of DVDs, and I'm sure a bunch of them had to do with compromising. And then I think he was also into child pornography too. So we have no idea.
So they have all the DVDs.
They have all the DVDs.
They have the black book. They literally have everything.
Everything.
And nothing is happening. What's your opinion of the FBI nowadays?
Well, I mean, it's in this case, it's obviously unbelievably corrupt. The FBI knew. Okay, so the FBI knew about Jeffrey Epstein in 1996. We know that for a fact. Maria Farmer, who was assaulted by Jeffrey Epstein, and her sister was assaulted by Jeffrey Epstein, went to the FBI in 1996 and told them about Jeffrey Epstein. Now, and it's amazing. Think if the FBI had acted on Maria Farmer's information. Think of all those girls that could have been saved. But
I don't even know why anybody who has, I can't even imagine applying for a position at the FBI nowadays. Well, I don't understand what they do, and I don't understand any red-blooded, whatever, anybody with an ounce of integrity in this country. I do not understand what they are doing working for the FBI. I don't know what they do now,
and
except cover-ups. They do a lot of cover-ups.
I have met some decent FBI agents over the years. I mean, I have.
Who are they serving?
I don't know.
That's what, like, you think you're doing something for the better, like for the good of the country.
But we're talking, we're talking the Department of Justice and the FBI together. I mean, so the FBI had hundreds of DVDs of Epstein. I'm sure a lot of them were compromised DVDs, and I'm sure a lot of them were just child pornography. So they've gone into a black hole.
I mean, we talked earlier, and it's these guys. Oh, they're worried about their mortgage and their car payment and this and that. And it's like, sell your car, get a smaller house. What expense are you willing to cover these up for? There's kids being raped.
It's
your car.
It's
get a new job.
But people do not think that way. They, like I said, they're afraid of losing what they have or not getting what they want. But now this is interesting. So when Epstein died, they said that the case was closed. So I did a Freedom of Information Act request. I didn't ask for the DVDs. I asked for reports on the DVDs. That was my FOIA request. And I eventually got an email back saying that the case was ongoing. So I don't know if those reports on those DVDs will ever come out. It would be great. I mean, then we'd be able to get a lot of answers. It's up to our government. Our government needs to get honest about this. And until it does, I mean, we're going to be governed by the cesspool that we're currently being governed by. People that aren't concerned about doing the right thing, they're concerned about their money and prestige. And you see this, I mean, it's a historical trend. I mean, like the Catholic Church, Penn State, Boy Scouts, money, property, and prestige. They will not, all those kids that were molested, all those kids that molestations that got covered up, they were all covered up so those organizations could perpetuate their money, their power, and their prestige. And individuals are the same way.
Let's talk about Maxwell. How did she play into everything? What was her role?
Well, she was the she was the one that was really hands-on running the network, the logistics person. I interviewed an Israeli spy, Ari Ben Menashe, on my podcast. And, he's a spy. It's difficult to know if he's telling the truth or not. But, okay, so her father, Robert Maxwell, had a publishing empire, but he was also a spy for Israel and Russia and the UK and probably the US. And he had this huge publishing empire. And what he did was he went into the retirement funds of his employees and stole them all.
So Maxwell's dad was an Israeli spy.
Yes.
Who was running logistics for Jeffrey Epstein.
No. So he was a spy for sure. And then he had a huge publishing empire.
But his daughter
and
was running logistics for Jeffrey
Epstein, yes.
Who has been named by government officials that he's untouchable because he's in intelligence.
Yes.
So there's a line.
There's
right
a nexus there. Yeah. And Maxwell had a yacht called Lady Ghislaine, which was named after his daughter, Ghislaine, who was his favorite child. And he jumped off one day. And he had a very mysterious death, much like Jeffrey Epstein. Now, the cover story on it is that, because it did come out that he'd ripped off all these, the retirement funds of all these employees. Millions of dollars. He destroyed all these people. A guy obviously didn't have a conscience. And Ghislaine Maxwell supposedly then came to New York to get away from it. And then that's where she met Jeffrey Epstein. Now, according to this Israeli spy that I interviewed, Robert Maxwell put Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein together. And they were together even before he died, before his mysterious death. Some people think it's suicide. Some people think it's homicide. It's a very strange death.
And what again, from my understanding, I don't know. I'm not an investigator in this stuff, but the rumor that I heard is that her father linked her up with Jeffrey Epstein. And so it was through her father that they actually met, not some random connection in New York. Not that they didn't meet in New York, but that her father was the one behind it. And obviously it's a fact that he was working with Mossad. And so the mysterious death jumping off the boat, we know is most likely in relationship to potentially the Israeli intelligence agencies. Just wanted to throw that out there.
So somehow Maxwell and Epstein got together. And the story is that Epstein had the money and Maxwell had the connections. And I think that there's some truth there.
And this guy was a spy for the Israelis, the UK, and possibly the US, and I believe you named another one.
And possibly Russia, yeah.
And do all these countries have people involved in this trafficking ring?
With Jeffrey Epstein, it's really difficult to know. Jeffrey Epstein was active in Europe, for sure. He was actually buying. We're not talking renting. He was buying young girls in Eastern Europe, buying them like slaves.
Yeah.
And when you think about that, how evil that is.
We've covered this in other episodes about how trafficking works. But I believe you mentioned something about, were there members in the UK government involved or within the royal family?
Okay, so definitely Prince Andrew was part of, he was pandering, Epstein was pandering girls to Prince Andrew, and who is a thoroughly repulsive human being. I did some research into him, and anybody that ever worked for the royal family loathes Prince Andrew.
What was he into? What was his deal?
He liked underage girls. That was his thing. But he's just a nasty, foul human being. I think a lot of the people in the royal family are probably nasty, foul human beings. I think Andrew is probably a little special that way. He's probably a little nastier and more foul than his siblings, because and this is very strange. So here's a guy that molests underage girls, but he has all these teddy bears, and the butler or whoever takes care of the house manager where he lives, they're supposed to have the teddy bears on his bed in a certain way. And if the teddy bears aren't on his bed the way that he likes them, then he has a conniption. So he likes to molest little girls, and then he likes teddy bears on a certain way on his bed. So that's kind of, And according to Andrew, he doesn't sweat either, according to the BBC interview. So, which really, I mean, there was that BBC interview where he attempted to acquit himself, and he came across as such an idiot. I mean, you could tell that. It's like Jamie Dimon with JP Morgan. JP Morgan just gave Epstein's victims $290 million.
Yeah.
And there was a New York Times article where Jamie Dimon was talking, and you could tell that the guy was lying. I mean, it didn't take rocket science to figure out. And then, he's saying, of course, we had nothing to do with Jeffrey Epstein, blah, 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 blah. And then all of a sudden there's this $290 million settlement. So obviously these banks were integral to what Jeffrey Epstein was doing. And they knew, according to these lawsuits, these banks, JP Morgan, Deutsche Bank, they knew exactly what Jeffrey Epstein was up to.
How do you think they were involved?
Well, I think that some of the executives in those banks, like Just Staley, I mean, were involved in Jeffrey Epstein's pedophile network, and
why are they going? I guess what
and Diamond too.
I'm kind of. I mean, it's not, so if they sued J.P. Morgan and not the individuals, how was J.P. Morgan as a company involved in the Jeffrey Epstein, sex trafficking ring, rather than just the key players that were? I mean, do you see what I'm getting at? Why wouldn't they go after the key individuals? And why did they go after the company, JP Morgan? Well,
the argument that they made was that JP Morgan was cognizant of Jeffrey Epstein trafficking children and gave him the money to facilitate it. They gave him money to do other things, but with the money that JP Morgan gave Jeffrey Epstein, that facilitated his child trafficking.
I mean, do you think this was a protection? Were they protecting certain people's identity by putting it into the company?
Absolutely, Just Staley and Diamond. I mean, without a doubt. I mean, it's pretty obvious that when you look into them, they were involved with Jeffrey Epstein.
How were they involved?
I think that they were probably involved in molesting young girls. I mean, that's my surmise on that. And according to internal documents that were that the lawyers for the Epstein victims were able to acquire, JP Morgan definitely knew what Jeffrey Epstein was up to. Now, how would JP Morgan know that unless some of those executives were taking part in it? I mean, it doesn't make any sense that JP Morgan would not know about it. So if those individuals, like I've just named, weren't involved with Jeffrey Epstein.
Were those names involved in the lawsuit? Were they mentioned in the lawsuit?
They were mentioned, yes.
Okay.
But it wasn't explicit. But they were mentioned, yeah. And then Deutsche Bank is also the same type of thing. They were aware of Jeffrey Epstein, and they're going to give up millions of dollars to him. I think they're only going to give up $75 million.
That's it?
Yeah.
How many victims is this going to be dispersed to?
I don't really know those numbers yet. But there's multiple tragedies here. But one of the major tragedies is $290 million isn't even going to dent JP Morgan.
I'm well aware, but I totally agree with you. That's nothing.
I mean, it's like you or me getting like a parking ticket. So that's a tragedy. It's a tragedy that those executives were molesting these girls. It's a tragedy that a number of people at those banks knew that those executives were molesting those girls, that those girls were getting molested. And it's a tragedy that they're only giving up $290 million. The whole thing is a tragedy. But here's the thing with that is it's these little girls. I mean, they're the ones that are going to be scarred for the rest of their lives, even if they get millions of dollars. I mean, if you talk to some of them, they're damaged. I mean, they're going to be damaged. I mean, and I'm not saying that, because I respect them. The ones that I've met, I respect. I really, care for them. I like them. But there's a damage there. That, I mean, they've got scars on their soul.
I mean, when you rape an 11-year-old kid,
yes,
there's nothing that's going to get them over that amount of trauma.
No, and actually,
you've ruined their entire life.
And actually, if you meet a woman in South Africa who's 20 years old, and then you fly her to Epstein Island and she's forced to commit all kinds of things that she never would have otherwise. I mean, she's not gonna have like maybe the psychiatric damage of an 11-year-old, like with dissociation, but she's going to be damaged too.
Mhm.
I mean, none of the, and that's the thing that the media, these girls and these young women all of them were very damaged by this. And we don't hear about that in the media. We don't, there's no cover stories of these victims in the media and the damage that they've had to endure. There's none of that. I mean, we just hear salacious dirt that Jeffrey Epstein met Bill Gates in 2011, or that Jeffrey Epstein hung out with Harvey Weinstein here, and but it's just the media is just giving us salacious dirt. They're not demanding for any kind of justice.
Yeah, they're just trying to save face by throwing a random piece of bullshit out about it, like, oh yeah, we touched the subject.
And but I don't know if it's. I mean, it elicits a readership too. I mean, there's and that's the thing. What I'm doing with Epstein Justice is, and I got to say this: the media have just been ethical eunuchs about this whole thing. They haven't really cared about the destruction of all these girls, but they're keeping Jeffrey Epstein front page center. They're keeping him alive. They're reporting about him every day. So America, I mean, he's fresh in the minds. Now, if he had died 4 years ago and the media had just stopped completely reporting about him, I would not be able to start Epstein Justice, because Americans would have forgotten. They've kept Jeffrey Epstein fresh in the minds of Americans. And there's enough Americans out there that are outraged. That's why Epstein Justice is so important, is we need to get Americans together, and we need a Truth and Reconciliation Committee. We need the perpetrators to be punished, and we also need to know why our government allowed perpetrators to molest underage girls. We need to know that. The government has to tell us. I have a pretty good idea of why, but we need the government to tell us that. That's what a Truth and Reconciliation Commission is about.
Let's talk about Sarah Kellen, an associate of Epstein, and once looked at it being charged with similar crimes as Maxwell, but has never been arrested. I've never even heard of her.
Sarah Kellen was, she was like Maxwell's first lieutenant. And she did everything that Maxwell did. And she's a vicious woman. And actually, when the Palm Beach Police Department was going to arrest Jeffrey Epstein, they had those 5 girls that had come forward. They had statements from. They were going to arrest Sarah Kellen too. They felt like Sarah Kellen had participated enough that they were going to arrest her. Nothing has happened to Sarah Kellen. Actually, I called Sarah Kellen because I had the black book. I figured I'd give her a call. And she just basically complained to me about how the media had persecuted her.
Did she have any ties like Maxwell's father?
Not that we know of. I think she just comes from white trash. And I mean, I'm sure that she sexually catered to Epstein at one point, and then Epstein said, well, she's pretty smart and ruthless, so I'm going to use her too.
Why do you think they never went after her?
They never went after any of the procurers except for Maxwell. The New York Times named 6 procurers. I mean, Sarah Kellen, Nadia Marcinkova, Leslie Groff, Haley Robson, they were all named by they're right there in the New York Times, named. And how, if this was real justice, if there were real justice here, it would be like a RICO indictment, how the mafia was taken apart. You take the little fish, and child trafficking is a 15-year to life sentence. So you indict Sarah Kellen on 10 counts of child trafficking, which wouldn't be that difficult. I mean, you could probably indict her on 20 or 30, but just indict her on 5 or 10. Have her look at 5 to 10 lifetimes in prison. She's going to roll over on the perpetrators. Anybody that's looking at 5 to 10 lifetimes in prison is going to roll over on the perpetrators. You could have done that with all these procurers, which are essentially pimps. You could have done that with all of them. And they're right, and a bunch of them are named right there in the New York Times. And none of them have had any problems at all. And actually, Epstein paid them all very well. And they still have their money that they made from Epstein.
Let's talk about Juliet Bryant. You've mentioned her a couple times.
Juliet Bryant was a victim of Epstein. I talked to her. She was from South Africa, and she was with Epstein. Flew her to New York, and she kind of settled in. And then they told her she was going out to the island. But she was in the Epstein's New Mexico ranch, and now I'm a little fuzzy, but she kind of passed out or went to sleep, and then she came to, she says, in a laboratory, and that there was a doctor that was harvesting, like in a hazmat suit almost, harvesting her ovums. And I've always thought Dolly the sheep was cloned in 1997. If you can clone a sheep, you can clone a human being. And actually, people are getting like their French bulldogs cloned for like $60,000. But it's estimated that you can clone a human being for $1.5 million. So, and I knew when Dolly got cloned, the sheep, there's got to be megalomaniac billionaires out there that are cloning themselves. There's just got to be. And that Epstein crew, I would not surprise if Juliette Bryant's ovums were getting harvested because those sick, twisted megalomaniacs are cloning themselves.
All right, skip through this ad. Hope you guys are enjoying this stream so far. Again, God bless y'all for being here. Smash that like. Again, feel free to send in a super chat if you have any questions or comments using YouTube or Dono Chat or Streamlabs. Streamlabs is also a great option, and I can bring those up on screen along with YouTube. So without further ado, let's get back to it. We're on the last stretch here. And then we're going to wind it down. So again, if you have any questions or anything that you want to say, feel free to do that during this basically about last 20 minutes.
You think that these people are cloning themselves?
It wouldn't surprise me. I mean, what would prevent you from cloning yourself? Ethics would be one thing, but these people don't have any ethics. So then it's just a matter of money. And what's $1.5 million to these guys?
Nothing.
So, unfortunately, there's going to be probably little Jeffrey Epsteins running around in 20 or 30 years. And, that's kind of one of the last things we need.
Didn't he actually talk about spreading his DNA?
He did. And he was also into transhumanism. So who knows what was going on there? I mean, I think, like with Juliette Bryant's story where she felt like they were harvesting her ovums, I think that is Epstein, the cloning, the transhumanism. I think that law enforcement, if law enforcement ever took this seriously, could dig there and would find out some very interesting stuff.
What exactly is transhumanism?
Transhumanism is like combining, like being able to download someone's brain onto a computer chip, stuff like that. And now, granted, we're probably not that far along with transhumanism, but you need people to, for transhumanism to go forward, we're going to need people to experiment with. Mm-hmm. And I wouldn't be surprised if that was going on. Because here's the thing, when you're molesting little girls, I mean, there's no line in the sand of what you're willing to do and not willing to do. There's no ethics there. There's no morals there. You're going to do whatever you want, whatever makes you feel good. And that's epitomizes Jeffrey Epstein and this crew. They're doing whatever they want, and they're protected by the federal government, so they can do whatever they want. It's pretty heinous.
Nick, I'm just going to run through a couple of questions here, but
sure.
Why do you think the names on Maxwell and Epstein's list have not been publicized? None of them.
On their list?
Yeah.
What list is that?
On the Black Book. Why do you think it's never been officially publicized by any of? I mean, we hear about the Maxwell trial. Epstein supposedly killed himself, but nobody's coming. There's not one person has been charged with pedophilia.
Well, I mean, that's our government. I mean, our government has done everything it possibly can to cover up all these crimes. And that's why we need a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. I mean, we, the American people, have to force the government to actually pursue these crimes and then go after these perpetrators and then tell us why they're protecting these perpetrators. We need that too. We need a why, although I have a pretty good idea of why, but we need the government to tell us why so this doesn't occur anymore. This happened with the Franklin scandal. It's happened with Epstein. It's happened in a lot of different places. We have to make sure that our government doesn't cover up child abuse anymore, child trafficking. We have to make sure that our government has that fundamental level of decency to not cover up child trafficking. I mean, that should be a line in the sand. That should never be crossed by our government.
Do you think the government enabled Epstein to commit these crimes over the years? I mean, there are reports of, correct me if I'm wrong, but aren't there reports of CIA directors staying at his New York townhome?
Oh, I mean, yeah. I mean, there was a lot of people that stayed with Epstein. Actually, Woody Allen and Epstein were good friends, two ethical eunuchs. There's pictures of Woody Allen and Jeffrey Epstein walking down the street together. Like there's pictures of Andrew and Jeffrey Epstein walking down the street together.
And Woody Allen's one of the creepiest of these men. Not only is he married to an adopted daughter, there's video that you can find of one of his earlier wives, which it was proven factual. He essayed his own children. She was a little girl. I think she was like 3 or 4 years old. And she was traumatized, and his wife was bawling and saying, "How could you do this to Dylan?" She walks around grabbing herself, saying, "Daddy hurt me. Daddy hurt me." This dude is an absolute disgust. Woody Allen, absolute degenerate. So just wanted to say that. I'm not a fan. Anyways, thank you so much, AC, for sending in a $4.99 super chat. God bless you, brother. Really appreciate you being here, and thanks for the support. Thank you guys very, very much. All right. Continuing on.
But what we have to do is make sure that the government pursues justice here. We cannot sit back and say, okay, yep, Jeffrey Epstein and all his buddies, we're going to let them molest all these girls with impunity because they have power and they have money. We can't do that. I mean, this is a nation of laws. Laws have to apply to everybody, regardless of how poor someone is, regardless of how rich someone is. The law has to apply to everybody. This isn't about, unfortunately, we live in a system where it's often the best justice money can buy. Mm-hmm. But in this situation, the laws have to apply to everybody across the board. And when you get into a very dangerous area as far as a society, when you say, well, this law applies to him, but it doesn't apply to him. When you get into that type of moral relativism, it's very, very dangerous. And that's where we're at right now, is that type of moral legal relativism.
Let's talk about some of the hidden cameras that have been, were there hidden cameras at literally every property?
Yes, we know about hidden cameras. The first glimpse of hidden cameras came when the Palm Beach Police Department executed the search warrant on Epstein's Palm Beach house in 2006. Now, Epstein had been warned that search warrant was getting executed, but he didn't get rid of all his hidden cameras because the Palm Beach Police Department found hidden cameras. Now, in his New York digs and that huge townhouse he had, there was an actual room with multiple monitors. Earlier, I was talking about Craig Spence of the Franklin scandal had a room of monitors. Okay, so Maria Farmer, and also there was one other victim that was brought into the room by Epstein. And there were guys, as in multiple men, looking at the monitors. And the monitors had all the bedrooms and all the bathrooms. And it was Virginia Giuffre, and who was also shown the room. So that's a conspiracy right there. I mean, you've got guys sitting in this secret room looking at monitors. I mean, that shows that there's people colluding with Jeffrey Epstein as far as like the blackmail. I mean, that's a smoking gun right there. But then the island was a wire fraud official blackmail. There was an article in Vanity Fair where Maxwell had said that there's blackmail involved, or a friend of Maxwell's had said that about, and with New Mexico, yeah, it's everywhere where Jeffrey Epstein pandered minors, there was cameras.
Where do you think all this footage is now? Do you think it's with the FBI? Do you think it's with the CIA? Do you think it's
either the FBI or the CIA, one or the other?
Do you think people are still actively? Who did the blackmail get passed on to?
FBI or CIA? I mean, now we're talking some dark, malignant corner.
I mean, it's still got to be. I guess what I'm getting at is it's still, the blackmail is still being utilized by somebody. I mean, it's very obvious it's a blackmail operation. So what I'm asking is, Epstein's dead, supposedly. And so who's controlling the blackmail?
It's that dark, malignant corner of intelligence that did the Franklin scandal that oversaw Epstein. There is some dark malignant corner. I don't even, you really can't call it the CIA because there's a lot of people in the CIA that are decent people. And you really can't call it the FBI because I do believe that there are decent people in the FBI too, but there's some dark corner of our intelligence that has that information. But what's troubling is that dark corner has the power to make a U.S. attorney stand down when only constitutionally the president and the attorney general can make a U.S. attorney stand down. So that dark corner of intelligence, that malignant dark corner of intelligence, harnesses a tremendous amount of power. But I don't think it's that many people. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, how many people can it be? I mean, how many people can, I mean, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000? I mean,
I don't know. It's what's interesting to me is, I've worked in operations where there's classified information and several of them. And, the more people you tell, the more likely there's going to be a leak. And when we talk about the operation, and I'm green to this, you've been digging into this for 20 plus years, correct?
Yeah.
And you said it yourself, you've got pilots, you've got
crooks,
you've got really low level people that were involved one way or another. I mean, you have the people that were on the runway. It's, you know what I mean? That's that directed the plane to take off. You have the pilots, you have whoever was cleaning the properties. You have all these low level type people that know what's going on, but yet they've managed to silence all of them. And then you have, all the way up to everybody that partook in it, that black book. I don't know how many names are in there. There's got to be a ton of them. I've seen different things. I don't know what's real and what's not anymore on the internet, so I don't want to give any sources, but I've seen documents that have lists of just names, lots and lots of names. And those people are all silent. Then we're talking about 4 different countries that have been involved with Epstein. They're all silent. And so it's almost a miracle that more isn't out on this.
Well, that's just because
there's so many people involved.
That's because our government has made sure.
That's this government, though.
And actually, I think the Brits and the French have followed suit. I mean, Jean-Luc Brunel, who was one of the pedophiles, that he ran a modeling agency for Epstein, and he was responsible for funneling underage Eastern European girls to that Epstein network. The French came after him, but he hung himself in a cell. So, and then we know about certainly Prince Andrew's role in Epstein. I mean, he gave Virginia Giuffre millions of dollars, or his mother did. I mean, it's kind of weird that he's getting bailed out by his mother still. He's 60 years old, but I guess that's how things work in the royal family. But anyway, law enforcement isn't going to pursue people in the UK. I mean, Jean-Luc Brunel, who hung himself in a French cell. I mean, he was instrumental to Jeffrey Epstein's network, but the French don't seem to be interested in why he hung himself or who he was facilitating. So our government has done a real good job of making sure that there's no investigation.
Do you think he killed himself?
Okay, so I've talked to people that have been at that prison, and they say that there's no way that, especially because he tried to kill himself earlier. And
he did, where?
At that prison. And then they put him in. I've been told that there's no way if you're on suicide watch, you can kill yourself in that prison. But I try not to get bogged down in that because that's not really the issue here. Whether or not he killed, I mean, if he killed himself or didn't kill himself, I mean, that's just one more component of corruption. The really important issue is we have our government aiding and abetting child trafficking. That is the issue that we need to take care of, not whether or not Jeffrey Epstein killed himself. We need to take care of the government. Has got to come clean. It's got to indict these perpetrators, and it's also got to come clean why it's doing this.
Well, I'm with you. I do think it's a big piece of the puzzle. I mean, like I said earlier, the judge that they tried to assassinate. I think they killed her husband and her son.
Her husband or someone, and then he supposedly killed himself.
Yeah.
And then it was done. There wasn't any mention in the news anymore.
Yeah, that was the assassination attempt on the judge. That was about a 24-hour news cycle before that was launched.
Yes,
I'd love to get that judge on here, but
I would too. I'd be very reluctant. I think that should be very reluctant to talk.
But what do you? So we know it was a blackmail operation. Obviously, what do you think after everything you've dug into? What is the blackmail operation? What is it for? Is it just power? Is there a specific agenda? And where? I mean, we already have multiple lines of connections here with the U.S. government, with the Israeli government, with UK, with France. Who's running this?
Okay, so
I think what I'm getting at is it sounds like Jeffrey Epstein was an intelligence asset.
Israel, anyone?
For in international intelligence assay?
It's possible. Yeah. I mean, I think that the CIA was certainly involved, and probably Israeli intelligence too. I do believe, and I hate buzzwords and stuff like that, but you can call it the medical or the military intelligence complex. Why do we spend so much money on the military compared to anybody else? Why do we sell far more weaponry than anybody else? Why does our government Kellogg, Brown and Root in Afghanistan? That Afghanistan war went on for 20 years, and these private military contractors made billions of dollars. DynCorp, another military contractor. DynCorp was actually trafficking girls, underage girls, in the Balkans. It got busted. There was a movie made about it with Myra Sorvino. DynCorp didn't skip a beat. That wasn't even a speed bump for DynCorp.
I've never heard of that.
Yeah. So this is the problem: is you've got the people at the upper echelon in the military, in the intelligence, and probably in finance too, that there's a collusion. And this is another reason why we need a Truth and Reconciliation Commission.
So what do you think the goal is? Is it control?
It's control and power. I mean, that's always been the goal for any autocrat or immoral government, is control and power.
I mean, you have to be thinking about this as you're digging into this stuff. I mean, who's the puppet master?
I think that there are probably, I don't think that there's one single guy. I mean, I look at it as like the media. There's 6 corporations that control, it's estimated 90% of the media that Americans imbibe. And they all work it out. I mean, they make sure that there's certain truths that don't come out. And I think that there are probably groups of people that work the same way, that have the power. And I think that they're in the military, they're in intelligence, and probably finance too. And that's why our government, we need to know why. We need, the American people need to know why Jeffrey Epstein's perpetrators aren't indicted, and we got to make sure that they get indicted. We've got to know why the government is covering up so this doesn't recur, and who's it covering up for, other than these perpetrators. I mean, these are fundamental questions that the American people need to know. We need to know this about our government. We cannot let this just slide and think it's going to get better. That, we'll just forget about this, and in 20 years things are going to be better. I mean, our politics are really corrupted, and we ostensibly have a 2-party system. But Jesse Ventura, the former governor of Minnesota, he says it's just like professional wrestling. He said, we sound antagonistic, but that's just part of the script. We're getting paid by the same people. He said politics and professional wrestling are basically one and the same thing.
It's all theatrics.
Yeah.
The big uniparty.
Yes.
Absolutely true.
And I've come to believe that. At this point, I haven't voted for a Republican or a Democrat for years. And I mean, I'd like to be able to vote for a Republican or a Democrat, but I don't trust any. We've got 435 representatives. We've got senators. I'm not aware of any representatives. I'm not aware of any senators that have called for a Truth and Reconciliation Commission into the crimes of Jeffrey Epstein. 535 federal legislators, not a single one, regardless if they're Republican or Democrat, has called for any kind of Truth and Reconciliation Commission into Jeffrey Epstein. 535. I mean, that's pretty astounding when you think about it, that all our federal legislators are willing to let this slide.
Well, the next one I have on here, I'm going to ask them. I will. I'll put them on the spot. What am I missing? What's something I should be asking you that I haven't asked yet?
I just think it's really important that the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, that Epstein justice, is embraced by enough Americans so that we can have a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. That is the only way that I think that we're going to be able to heal our government.
Which is highly doubtful. We're not even going to get a Truth and Reconciliation Commission for January 6th, of which we have actual videotape evidence, which disproves the entire narrative. We have, in fact, instead we had the J6 committee, which was an investigation which totally lied to the country. And so the idea that a groundswell of Americans are going to get the federal government to actually look into this stuff and do something, I'm highly, highly skeptical. Again, maybe you guys disagree, but it seems like there's a generational difference in the amount of people who have any sort of faith in the federal government. I've could be wrong, but something I've noticed tends to be the older that you are, the more you feel that the government can actually do something, or that there's still the good guys, or that there's the majority of good guys. It's just a small group of bad guys. And the younger you are, I think the more and more skeptical you are of the whole thing. So that's just my little 2 cents.
Our government is sick. Our government, it's a cancer. It's metastasized. And you fight disease. There's three critical stages of fighting disease. First, you need awareness of it. Then you need acceptance, and then you need action. So Epstein justice, we have awareness. We need the American people to accept how corrupt it is. A lot of them have, but we need the American people en masse, and then we need action. Awareness, acceptance, action.
So EpsteinJustice.com is a 501(c) nonprofit organization dedicated to establishing.
All right, guys, that's going to do it. Major thank you to everybody. Kristen says, DPH, you should get Andrew to get you back on the Crucible. He's got over 1,000 live over there right now. Oh, interesting. I was not aware. I think he's doing one of his trash talks tonight. Those tend to always be pretty popular, and I think he's doing on Dillahunty. So, yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of people over there interested in that. But thank you, Christian, and thank you to everybody out there. Smash that like. This is gonna do it for the stream. Again, over on Dono Chat, I want to thank Blue Skittle. Over on Streamlabs, let me just double check. I want to thank Tinfoil Hat Girl, Gary, for the very generous super chat. Thank you so much, Gary. I truly appreciate you, brother. And thank you, Trained Logos Motion, and DC Woodworking. So thank you, guys. And then over on YouTube, a major thank you to First Person Q. Thank you, Wire. Thank you, Bill Hicks, for becoming a member tonight. Thank you, Hugo Nava. Thank you, T. Sanders, for the super chat. Thank you, One Foot Out the Door. And thank you, my brother AC. Wish you and the family nothing but the best. And that's going to do it for tonight. I am going to be back tomorrow doing a sponsored stream on narcissistic personality disorder. Should be a fun one. And that will be the night before Thanksgiving. I wish you all a wonderful Thanksgiving holiday. God bless you all. Thank you all for the support. And I, again, God willing, will see you all tomorrow. So as always, until then, God bless.